Good evening, it's 5:30, Tuesday, September 22nd. This is the regular meeting of the Fargo Board of Education being called to order. Is there a motion for approval of the agenda?
So moved.
There's a motion, is there a second?
Second.
All right, all in favor signify by saying yes. Yes, opposed? Motion passes. Moving on to staff reports, and I just wanted to mention that we do have a time-sensitive item this evening at 6 o'clock. We have a public hearing that we need to call. So we will start with staff reports with the understanding that we might need to break that up a little bit. We'll see how that goes. But we are going to start this evening with an FEA report, and Ms. Mastrud, welcome.
Thank you, school board and cabinet members. I apologize for my tardiness as I was just on the phone with a concerned parent. So we had a really great dialogue, so I'm going to go ahead and talk about that a little bit. Tonight I want to share, this isn't a message about us versus them that's happening in our community regarding COVID-19, but this is a message of us working together, or better yet, as we like to say in FEA, standing united. So what do we all want? For starters, we want COVID-19 to go away. I think that would make life so much easier. But we also want normalcy. We want to see a glimmers of life we had prior to March of 2020. This is why schools are under fire right now in order to make this happen. If we all have our normal bubbles of our life, our families, everything would be a little bit easier right now during this hard time of a pandemic that is worldwide. This is not just Fargo. Schools are just small microcosms of our community. This is what we see eventually happening. Whatever's happening in our community starts to trickle into our schools. The rate is just a little bit slower. So the question is, how do we give normalcy to our families under this pressure cooker of COVID-19? We must first look at what's happening in our community environment. Are people starting to get lackadaisical over COVID-19? Are we starting to get burnout by staying vigilant? We hear of people saying COVID doesn't affect kids the same as adults, but who's in the buildings with these students? I dare say that we have adults ranging from 20 years old to 70 years old, working with our students every single day. So how do we offer full face-to-face while not putting the adults that are building at risk? Or how do we create a safe, secure place for our kids so they don't get the virus and they don't bring it back to their families? Is we have families in our schools who don't have health insurance. They don't have sick days. They cannot afford to have COVID-19 come into their households, along with many of our current staff members. So wouldn't this eventually affect our community? So in talking with a concerned parent tonight about virtual learning, I was refreshed to hear the collaboration that we all desire, the need for transparency of the data, the need for the communication, the need for our community to step up and do their part to help our kids stay in school. This really is a community effort. It can't just be put back on the school. It can't just be put back on the parents. So the solution must be orientated together. This is not about us versus them. This is about us and keeping everyone safe physically and mentally. I have teacher burnout right now at the rate that we would normally see in February or March. They are in an intense pressure, not only from the strains of their everyday work, but connecting with the kids outside, worrying about their mental health, worrying about their own mental health during this time. As we hear parents saying they're fighting for their kids to get back in school, I just want everyone to know every single teacher wants that too. Every school board member wants that. So what can we do? I asked the cabinet to keep that conversation open between the teachers and to keep that open between the parents. I know that Dr. Gandhi and his team are compassionate, full of heart. They want what's best for the kids and they want what's best for the teachers, because we know that the workplace and the school place is exactly of the same. So tonight I asked the school board to continue to look at how can we be more transparent with the data? How can we share our substitute fill rate? How can we share the presence of COVID-19 in our buildings? How can we share the presence of the number of kids that are affected by this and isolated? How can we send a message that education is the priority, not all the extras in life? Though those are creating normalcy, I get that. But if we want to have kids back in school, we have to step up as a community together. So again, this is not about us versus them. This is about us working together, and I'm excited for the parents to continue to be solution-based, the school board, the cabinet, and the teachers, and we'll get through this. Thanks.
Thank you, Jennifer, and I look forward to our discussion tomorrow afternoon. Next is the Engagement and Experience in Co-Curricular Activities Monitoring Report. Todd Olson, and is Ainsley also here?
Yes,
Okay.
she is.
Thank you.
President Knutson, members of the board, I'm excited to share with you some of our data from the 2019-2020 school year that relates to our strategic plan. We surveyed our students in May, which when we sent that out, we weren't sure what we were going to get back, and I was very excited to see that well over 1,200 students responded to a survey without the benefit of being in school, and we hound them a little bit in a normal year to please complete the survey. Is on the daily announcements. It's done during advisory time. So I was pretty excited that 1,200 kids took the time to complete the survey, even with all the things we have going on. I'm going to run through some demographic information here at the start, and then in your packet you have the equivalent of 3 slides on each sheet, so I'm going to run through those fairly rapidly. As you see here, we had 83% indicated that they were participants. Far higher percentage of females than males responded this year. Normally that's very close to 50-50. See here we have a breakdown by grade and by school. So we got a pretty nice mix. Then we move into what was your majority of your participation. You see we're about half athletics. These are always my favorite slides here, these next 3. Why I have it broken down by athletic activities, fine arts activities, and academic activities and clubs. Why do we do this? In all 3 cases, because it's fun. And that's what it should be. We moved on to asking students if they feel connected and cared about during their participation. And again, we're about 90% strongly agree or agree in all 3 areas. So we have a lot of people doing a lot of good things with our kids. Next, we move on to asking the kids about character development. And again, over 90% on the right side of this. Emphasizing citizenship, sportsmanship, and respect. Again, very high percentages agree or strongly agree. Did they feel safe? Again, we're in that 90+% range for agree and strongly agree. This is one we hear a lot about during the course of a regular year. Were you communicated with positively by your coach, by your director, by your advisor? And again, very strong percentages in favor. This one's off the charts. For performing arts, 92% strongly agree. Was your coach, director, or advisor knowledgeable about your activity? And very high percentages. I really wondered as we sent this out if, because kids had already been home for 2 months, if they might just be a little sour about some things, and clearly was not the case. This one's related to working with people and being a better teammate. This one asks them, does your participation make you a better student? Again, very high percentages. Why did you choose not to participate? I mean, we offer a very, very wide variety of activities. You know, years ago it was the idea of kids holding down a job and needing to hold down a job. That percentage has shrunk almost every year that I've given this survey. Now the biggest reason is they just weren't interested in what we had to offer. So along with that, a few years ago, a board member suggested that we say, okay, what are you being involved in then? And here you see we have a lot going on in our community that we don't necessarily sponsor, but they're great activities for kids. Some of them are based on what we don't offer at the middle level. You know, until a student is, in most cases, a sophomore, they don't play hockey for us. We don't have middle school soccer right now, so some of those things are pretty understandable. And we have some great programs in our community that are not Fargo Public Schools programs. Another one of our indicators each year that we show you is GPA. How do our participants' GPA compare to the overall GPA in the district and the non-participating students? That outcome is always very similar. Our participants have a better GPA. Team Scholar recipients, that's an award given by the North Dakota High School Activities Association. If your combined team GPA is 3.2 or better, well, we missed out on a lot of activities this spring, so that number is artificially low this year at 38. Oftentimes it's in the 60s and 70s. I'm going to turn it over to our performing arts specialist, Ainsley Renfro.
Hello. I feel like I'm going to refer to in a normal year a lot tonight, so we're just trying to keep that normalcy in mind. So starting with our middle school theater productions, usually we have a one-act and a musical in all the middle schools. This year, our musicals will continue depending on where we're at when we get to February and January. But the one-acts are more of a theater camp, focusing on teaching those theater skills, since we aren't necessarily able to do the one-act performance. So they were creative with how to continue doing an activity with the restrictions we have. Our high school theater activities, performances, you can see up there. All high schools have a musical, a one-act, as well as a play. And then there are many other opportunities such as South High Live and Cabaret and things like that. You can see the productions up there. The musicals have all been switched to the spring this year, again in hopes that we can have them. We have some extra restrictions considering aerosol spread with singing and music production. So we wanted to give them the best chance of being able to put on the bigger performances of the musicals. So we'll keep our fingers crossed and do what we can. Here are some of our co-curricular performing arts programs that are offered at the elementary level. This year they are not happening at the elementary level, at least not for right now, but we will get back into them as soon as we can. Here are programs at the middle school level, and again, we're being creative with those programs, but some of them are happening now with some interesting adaptations. And at our high school level. And most of these are happening currently, again, with some extra precautions. We are very lucky to have a program, the Learning Bank, which has Fargo, West Fargo, and Moorhead Public Schools participating in it. And it is a nonprofit that organizes a cultural performance for every grade level, 1 through 6, every year. That program is currently on hold this year because it would be connecting all of those districts together in one place. But it will pick up again next year, and we'll be participating in that again. Fargo Public Schools is also a national partner with the Metropolitan Opera of New York, and normally we have, they provide 50 free tickets to 4 different operas that are live streamed into a movie theater. They also provide an educational guide that is linked cross-curricular with the different productions. It's really an amazing product that they provide. This year, the Met is dark until January, so no performances. Hopefully they'll be able to return come January, but they have still provided an awesome opportunity for their Met partners, and they are providing free Met HD Live on demand subscriptions to students who are interested, and students will have availability to everything on the Met HD Live on demand program, but they have specifically created curriculum and ed guides for the 10 operas that are listed up there, and they've kind of done a compare and contrast with each one, so it's 5 sessions. You can see the curricular ties there and the focuses. There are programs that are appropriate for elementary all the way through high school. So some celebrations. I'm sure you've heard that there were 4 students last year in Fargo Public Schools that scored perfect ACT scores, and all 4 of those students were involved in music and the performing arts, most of them in more than one group. You can see that. There are some band EDC solo outcomes there, and then also I shared with you in the spring that there were 87 Fargo Public School students who were accepted into the all-state performing groups. I also want to point out the outstanding performance. Usually it's a big celebration to have 1 outstanding performance from a district, and last year, just in band, we had 8 from Fargo Public Schools. Some specific awards. Ben Franklin was honored by International Music Camp by having a top 10 enrollment from Ben Franklin. So they are sending their kids for some extra, or encouraging them for some extra opportunities at International Music Camp in the summers. Abigail Berg from Davies High School was named North Dakota Outstanding Band Student statewide, and that has to do with musicianship, leadership, as well as academic successes. And this last one is extremely exciting. The Davies High School Wind Ensemble was chosen as the 2020-2021 North Dakota Governor's Band for the year. So they will, again, fingers crossed, be able to perform at the State of the State address in early 2021. And then if they are ever called by the governor for another performance, they're kind of on call for that. So that's really excited. They needed to audition to be accepted and were chosen. We had multiple guest artists last year that came to work with our students. Bayo String Quartet worked with all of our high school orchestra programs, and that's 2 of them pictured in that photo. Dr. Wendy Barden, who's a specialist with evidence-based reporting in performing arts, came to talk with our staff as we transition into that in the future. And this is another visitor as well as another topic. You may have heard last year that NDDPI awarded Fargo, most districts in North Dakota, with a grant to connect SEL, social emotional learning, specifically to elementary music classes. And Fargo received quite a large grant from them. And the work that we are doing to connect, to build that, is we had Dr. Scott Edgar, who is pictured there. He is kind of the national go-to for SEL in the music world, and he came and worked with our elementary music staff in December on how we can make those curricular ties in our elementary classrooms. He is also partnering with us on actually creating we're really looking for a more exciting word than curriculum, but until we come up with that, a curriculum that it can be used in the elementary music room with lessons, music lessons that also tie in SEL. We really are finding this is, though it's a lot of work, it's certainly enjoyable and very natural because SEL and music are one, really. So that curriculum is currently being created, and we're piloting it with a few teachers this year, and then our goal is to have it district-wide next year with all of our elementary music teachers. We are also, through the grant, having a drum circle training this winter in January for our elementary music teachers, as well as purchasing some ORF and percussion instruments to create that community with the music groups. I just need to share, because it's very exciting, on a national level in the music world, Fargo is really on the map with creating this. We're one of only 2 places that are really jumping into this and creating this type of curriculum. So it's really, really exciting, and there's been great work done, and great work will be done, and I'm really excited about this project. And last but certainly not least, in the turmoil of the spring, we got some good news, and Fargo Public Schools was once again named a Best Community for Music Education in America for the 17th year. So we celebrate that, and thank you for supporting the arts in Fargo.
Thanks to both of you for the reports. Does anyone have any questions?
I've got a couple more slides, President Knudsen, that I was going to share.
Okay, go right ahead.
Can't have a conversation now without talking about what you're doing with COVID. So we've reduced attendance at our games. We are trying our very best to live stream every event that we can. We've changed some of our travel. We've restructured a lot of our events. 2014 volleyball tournament that I'm supposed to be hosting in 2 weeks is not going to be a 2014 volleyball tournament. It's going to be 4 teams in a gym in 3 different places around the community. Our cross-country meets are 10 runners per team, no more than 4 teams in that part of the meet, and then we leave enough time so they go home. The next 3 teams come in, they run, they go home, instead of 300 kids at the starting line like is typical. All of our golf meets are shotgun starts now. It's been very interesting, and I'm still asking the question, how are we going to do wrestling? Because that's going to be a tough one. Necessary versus normal is a conversation we're having every day. If we're going to provide this experience, what's necessary for it as compared to what's normal? I'll use our football schedules. Since I can remember, football teams have played a 9-game regular season schedule. First 2 weeks have been East-West crossovers. They went away this year. So we're just playing within our conference, only 7 games. And we've been doing activities now for 8.5 weeks. We haven't shut down a team yet, so that's pretty exciting. I don't know that I'll be able to say that in a week, in 2 weeks, in 3 weeks, but for 8.5 weeks, it's been pretty good. Just some of the events that we are hosting, and as of right now, we are hosting all of them. We have state soccer coming up here in a couple weeks at South High. That's going to be a very different looking state soccer tournament in terms of the teams that will actually come to Fargo. Dakota Bowl, we're fairly optimistic about Dakota Bowl. If NDSU is going to have 8, 9, 10,000 people in the dome, we don't get nearly that many at any one time. State swim and dive that's been a tough one because our swim teams in the east part of the state are so large. By the time we get all our participants in the pool over in West Fargo, we're at capacity. Then state volleyball and wrestling are a little further down the road, but we have a tournament managers committee meeting in Valley City tomorrow where we're going to try and put some structure on what fall tournament season is going to look like, and it's going to be interesting. Lastly, I just want to thank you for your support of our co-curricular activities program. I'm very proud of all the variety of things we offer and the quality of those programs. I'll take any questions anybody might have.
All right, questions now. Robin.
So we have one very excited band director at Davies, and that is my liaison school. Very proud that they are announced as the governor's band. So I could not walk in there without visiting their program. So I'll be there on Thursday because they reached out right away. So we're pretty excited.
That's great.
So we need to celebrate that and lift that up as much as we can. That's a big deal.
Absolutely.
Jennifer?
Thank you. Thanks, Todd. Always enjoy this report. I am curious, just real quickly, last year we had some different graphs included, and so there was clearly a formatting change, and I was just curious what drove that, if you were still tracking the same data or if that has changed as well.
I think the only thing that I recall changed was the reporting out of all the good things that went on in your building. And typically that's a spring function. And it didn't happen in the spring, obviously, and I thought, I can't go to my building activity coordinators and say, all right, backtrack to last year now, just to provide me that list of all these awards that we won. That will return, but I didn't think it would be fair to them to make them do that with all the things they have going on right now.
Any other questions, comments? Rupak?
I have a question for Ainsley, and it doesn't have to be answered today. 17 years running, we've been rated as one of the best communities for music education in our school district. I would just be curious at some point as to, is there any other district that has had that honor for that long running, and then maybe what percentages of school districts across the nation even get that recognition to begin with?
And I would invite you to provide us with that answer, and then we have 4 minutes before we have to get to that 6 o'clock meeting.
It'll be a quick answer because I don't have the specific data, but I'm a data person, so I will look into that. I do feel like there is a local, semi-local district in North Dakota that has been awarded 16 times, but I don't believe there are any for 17. But I will look into that.
Anyone else for one more? Robin?
One more music, because that's just what I have to do when I go home. South High has a new band director who's actually a South High graduate,
Yes.
Race Hoagland, Personality Plus. I think that we should expect some big things from him at South.
Yes, yep, it's exciting. He's working with his old teacher, and he's doing jazz band and the music composition classes at Davies and South.
He happened to be a student of my husband's too, so I'm guessing my husband will be a frequent guest in his class. But
Wonderful.
I hope this is the new John Sievertson for Fargo South. I think he will be. He's got that kind of personality.
And I think you would be honored to hear that, yep. He's wonderful.
All right, thank you both so much. Have a great evening. Thanks for everything that you do. And we have a couple minutes. I think we will we'll take a break from our official board meeting now. It is 5:57, and in just a few minutes, we will reconvene. We'll have the public hearing at 6 o'clock. It's 6 o'clock by my watch, and so calling to order right now the public hearing This is an opportunity for citizens to present oral or written comments regarding the property tax levy. Is anyone here to speak on that topic? Anyone here to speak on the property tax levy? All right, one more time. Is anyone here to speak on the property tax levy? All right, we'll close this public hearing. It is 6:01 p.m., Tuesday, September 22nd. And we're going to move right back into the regular board meeting. And going back under staff reports, we have finished the FEA report and the second item, which was a report on co-curricular activities monitoring, and we will now move to the superintendent's report. Dr. Gandhi.
I think the superintendent report was placed there, so you can cut me off, and now you don't get to do that, so I apologize. I think I'll just start with, first off, I just want to express my gratitude to all the members of the FPS COVID-19 Instructional Plan Committee. As we all know, and as most of the feedback that you've heard, is that yesterday they had to make an incredibly difficult decision. But they are working extremely hard, and I think it's really important to know, as President Masters alluded to earlier as well, that every member of the committee is committed to the same goal, which is to return to in-person instruction as soon as we can. But it's not just a matter of how do we get there as soon as we can, it's a matter of how do we stay there as well. And I think that's extremely important to know. So I know that we've gotten a lot of feedback, and I understand the frustration for our parents and our community members because we would love to provide in-person instruction when we can. I think the important thing to delineate here is that the dichotomy isn't between in-person instruction and distance learning. We're not trying to pin those two instructional models against one another. Is really what the committee has to wrestle with every time they meet is how can we pick an instructional model where we can continue providing educational opportunities. And I think, as I've shared before, one of the biggest challenges for us as a system is currently we have the definition of close contact, which is defined as 6 feet, 15 cumulative minutes or more. Anytime that we are in a situation where we can't identify only a small group of students or staff members to be a close contact, that means we are then jeopardizing the entire environment when we're consulted with Fargo Cass Public Health as potentially something that can be quarantined or required to quarantine if they're deemed close contacts for 14 days. So we know that the transition from October 5th through October 19th for online for secondary instruction, that's a challenge for our community, but we also know that on the flip end, if we just bring every student back and we don't have the physical capacity to keep them 6 feet apart and a classroom's decided to be close contact, then periodically throughout the day or throughout the year, we could just be shutting down classrooms for 14 days at a time. So that's really one of the bigger challenges for us as a committee. I think President Masters of FEA also talked about our sub-rate data, and I shared this with board members earlier today too. Last week, we had a 5.10% teacher substitute, unfilled substitute filled rate. This week, when the committee met on Monday, it was 18%. Still manageable. It's not been to the point where at any building we said, okay, we just don't have the bodies to be able to carry a classroom. But if we continue to go at that rate week after week and continue to grow at that rate, then that is going to become something that we have to take a look at as well. And then obviously at the end of the day, one of the paramount things and the number one goal for the committee is to honor our guiding principles. And number one is to keep making sure that we're keeping our students and our staff safe as well. So we know that there's a lot of conversations around the transition to distance learning. Please know that the goal of the committee is to switch, is to bring students back as soon as we can, but we have to be able to do that in a safe and efficient manner. The plan moving forward for us really as a district is going to be the committee reconvenes on October 5th, and at that time, they will make a decision on what they want to do beginning October 19th. Our goal is to continue to work based on new research, based on CDC guidance, work with Fargo Cass Public Health, to see if can we create a plan beginning October 19th to bring students back. What does that look like? How would we limit the amount of individuals that would be identified as close contact? But to do that, we would have to work, we do have to work with our teachers, we have to work with our administrators, get the buy-in, and that's really what our focus is going to be. It's going to be how can we improve and learn from hybrid learning so far across all levels schools, make changes to that if we need to, and then also make changes to our plan for in-person instruction to see if there is an opportunity to bring all of our students back at a faster rate and then stay at that level 4 or 5 if we were able to do that. So that's really just a little bit of a summary of some of the conversations that we had yesterday and what our plan is as a district moving forward. The second small update that I will just share with board members is, I think last week, board members, I shared with you a survey as we start planning and designing our new district office at the RDO building about your feedback on the boardroom. We've had 3 board members fill out that survey. Please take some time, even if you can't fill out every question or you're more apathetic to what the boardroom design is. I think there's a question in there specifically around moving forward, do we want to transition to paperless board meetings or not for board members? And I think that's we want to get your feedback on that, because that could significantly impact the way we provide technology and we set up that boardroom as well with the dais and the setup. So that feedback would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gandhi. Does anyone have questions? Okay. Moving on to the Student Wellness Family Facilitator Report. It's Memo 42, and Jennifer Starr is here. Welcome.
Thank you. So we're visiting tonight about, I'm just going to go back to the beginning here, looking at the Strategic Initiative 5 and the community outreach and communications, specifically around Goal 5 that addresses mental health, dropout prevention, and youth risk services. And right from the strategic plan, just wanting to, again, focus our thinking on, it is around mental health for our students, as well as students who are having difficulty with drug and alcohol issues, who need additional supports academically, as well as in their social emotional development, and therefore are at risk for dropping out. And so what's been identified in the strategic plan has been these 4 large bullets, including referrals to the community resources, which our SWIFTs, our Student Wellness and Family Facilitators, have been very involved with, and we'll spend some time talking about that, as well as our student attendance rates, graduation rates, and incident reports. So, like I mentioned, our referrals to community resources, while they might also come directly from schools with our administrators and our counselors, our Student Wellness and Family Facilitators really have a focus on enhancing the social and emotional and academic well-being of our students so that they can come to school ready to do the learning. And so our SWIFTs work closely in coordinating those services with community agencies for the purpose of prevention as well as intervention when that becomes necessary. They work really hard at alleviating barriers and do so through home visits, which has been a little bit trickier this fall, but we're working through trying to connect electronically. We've had a lot of front yard meetings as well to have those home visits, and we're starting to have a conversation about what does that look like in January. And then probably one of our largest barriers in connecting with families or getting families connected into the community is transportation. And we are not providing transportation as we once did, partially because of COVID, but also really thinking about the liability that lies within. And so we're starting to come around the conversations about how do we help families get to where they need to be when they're looking to be connected with those community partners. And Metro Area Transit has been fantastic during this time, offering to provide those free rides, although sometimes that can be tricky in terms of making those connections and where they travel to. So we're continuing to problem solve. How do we help families get to where they need to be when transportation is one of our largest barriers? Our SWIFTs have been working very hard always, and as you can imagine, even more so recently, by helping families get connected to food, shelter, physical, psychological safety, addressing physical and psychological safety issues, as well as helping families to obtain insurance so that they can do so. And then, of course, they're very involved in our schools, also with team meetings and collaborating with outside agencies. What you see on the screen right now really is a picture of our team. We have 9, almost all licensed social workers, one of whom will start the first week in October. So we're currently operating as a team of 8. And this year, those folks have been assigned specific schools. And we've done that intentionally to try and balance some workloads, as well as recognizing that we have someone in each of our regions, the south, central, and north part of town, that is also responsible and serves as the homeless liaison to provide supports to families who are currently homeless. And then just trying to work more effectively with our families as we think about travel time and working with those schools. So we'll move into a little bit of the data that you can see over time. Last year was our first year of being a team of 9. Prior to that, it was a team of 6. So in some ways, when you look at the increase in the number of new referrals that came in, we were in a position that we were able to handle a little bit more as well. So we had an increase from the previous year up to just over 521 students that were new referrals. That doesn't account for the students that we carried over from the previous year. But all students who were newly referred to the program and needing some type of support and connection to alleviate some barriers. This is one of the slides that we're probably the most proud of, and really looking at over time. You can see there's been an increase in the percentage of our new referrals coming out of the elementary schools and a decrease at high school. And certainly that doesn't mean that the need isn't there in high school, but what it does signify is that we're getting connected with families earlier in the child's academic career. And we know that early intervention is key, whether we're talking about social emotional development or in terms of being able to access academics as well. So we're very happy to be trending this way and working with families earlier in a child's educational career. This year as well, we just took some time to be able to look at those new referrals, again, by race, breaking it down. So what you see in the first column is from the 2019-20 school year, what percent of our Fargo Public Schools enrollment was each race, as compared to then what percentage of our new referrals last year fall into each category. And so certainly there is some work to do, although we're not too far off the mark, and we'll continue to have conversations as well as how do we dig deeper into each of these categories, really identifying the cultures that lie within each race too, and how we can continue to support based on various cultures and their approach to mental health as well, and some history that they have with that topic. This is a graph that doesn't seem to change a whole lot in the last few years. By far, the first 3 that you see, family instability, anxiety, mood, and depression, have been our forerunners for quite some time, and they continue to be so. And I mentioned a little bit that we talked about carryover. Last year, as we started the new school year, we had 403 students as we ended the school year, we have 403 students that we carried over into the 2020-2021 school year. And that's a pretty big number at the same time as we were closing out the year and being a little uncertain about what was going to happen over the summer and how we'd come back to school. We proceeded with caution and wanted to stay connected with families and have an opportunity to be sure we reached out right away in the fall to do so. On the other hand, we closed last year 532. So some of those were carryovers as well that might have been closed right away early on in the school year. Others were situations where families were able to stabilize and were able to continue the kinds of supports that had been established for them and no longer needed the involvement of the SWIFT worker. So when you combine those 2 columns, essentially last year, we had over 900 students, that were part of our program at some point during the year. And this is the graph that specifically is called out in the strategic plan. Where do our students go? How do we get them connected? And so what you see, the biggest connection that we're making with students is getting them into therapy. And so we had last year 584 students that were connected to mental health therapy over the course of the year. The other piece that's important to remember that is of those 900, there could be different categories here that each student might be connected to or each family might be connected to. And And I think what's also, I'm very proud of the social workers that we have on our team and their ability to connect with our community, because therapy is one of our 28 categories that we try to help families bridge that connection to. But as you can imagine, therapy is one category, but the number of providers in our community is plenty. We always feel like we're needing additional. So they're working with many community agencies and then people within those agencies to also help provide that connection. So the next piece related to the Strategic Initiative 5 is the incident reports, specifically minors, majors, and suspensions. So in the North Dakota Century Code, one of the pieces that's asked of us, right, is that we have policies, procedures, and guidelines that are identical at the elementary level, at the middle school level, and then again at the high school level, so that when our students come to any one of our schools in each of those grade bands, they know what the school expectations are, and if there happens to be an infraction, that the way that we respond to those infractions happens in a similar way. And our buildings have been working really hard on this. And as you can imagine, we all have different thresholds, and so it continues to be a conversation that we have and some learning that we continue to do. But this piece really is at the heart and centers us around how can we provide similar opportunities and similar responses for our students. So when we think about what's been happening with that 5-year MTSS and PBIS plan, again, perhaps a little shifting, that little squiggly line is now, I feel like it's becoming an about 5-year, thanks to the current situations and as we continue to learn and know more. We have focused a lot the last few years on positive behavior interventions and supports. And within that, you see this, 3 sub-bullets that have been our primary focus and continue to be as we move forward. This year, we have all of our elementary buildings online and in person who are providing social and emotional instruction to their students. The expectation would be a minimum of 2 to 3 times every week that they're providing specific lessons. At our middle school, this too is their first year of providing those specific lessons, and they'll be doing that during advisory. Also then at the high school, as a result of COVID, so it's not always bad, we have this opportunity to also encourage our high school teachers in presenting them opportunities for allowing social emotional learning within their content areas. So we've been working to provide some resources that helps them to do that. So SEL has been one of our main targets and will continue to be so. One of the pieces we want to be really careful about is that SEL instruction doesn't become this standalone. We know that it's important to teach it, and sometimes making it a standalone lesson is important so that we can all, as a school community, get on the same page. But the power of social and emotional instruction is about in the moment, just in time, and being able to reinforce, redirect, and support kids in those moments. Tied with that has been restorative practices, and we spent a lot of time last year talking about that as well. At the elementary level, we have been at that Tier 1 element overview. This year, we are training members at each elementary level as circle coaches. And so they were going to be working intentionally with their colleagues in the building to really implement the practices and the belief structure behind restorative practices, specifically around circles, and the power that circles can bring in building relationships, in understanding when something isn't going well, being able to have a conversation about how can we fix this together, and that it doesn't always have to be an infraction or a consequence that is a result of a mistake that is made. Next year, that'll be the same process that we'll move forward with the middle school. So always keep in mind that we continue to move through the levels on each of these. So what's happening with elementary this year is what will be happening with middle school next year, and then high school the following year in succession. And so going back to the North Dakota Century Code, that behavior reporting form, that is one of the pieces that we have been working on and we continue to refine and do better with. This is our 3rd year with implementation at the elementary level and our 2nd year at the middle school level. It would have been our 1st year at the high school. We're looking at that happening now next year. And it's from the behavior reporting form that we're able to take a look at some of the data then that's related to the minors and majors. Again, because we are in our third year, you're able to see the two previous years of minors and majors for elementary, and then just 1 year at the middle school. I think one of the biggest conversations we have around reporting or filling out the paperwork is trying to identify when, right? When is it appropriate to fill out minors and majors? We have spent more time in conversation around the majors because that one is a little bit more, it feels a little more black and white when there has been an infraction that does require some kind of further involvement. The minors is where we definitely want to continue building the skills around our staff members to have those restorative conversations so that those moments can be those teachable moments, that it doesn't have to be about a consequence, but that the consequence in terms of punishment, but that the consequence is, here's an opportunity for us to have a conversation and learn and grow. The other piece tied to this particular section is suspension. So for the last 2 years, you can see what our in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension is. And I feel like it's important to let you know that this is a piece that we're still trying to wrap our heads around between the state and locally, how we've been recording and reporting this information. We're not too far off the mark, but definitely is something that we need to continue having conversations about. So what you see on the screen now for the last 2 years have been overall number of days of suspension in kindergarten through 12th grade, which is something that, again, as we focus on PBIS, restorative practices, and trauma-informed practices in our buildings, that I anticipate we're going to see reduced. That's definitely a goal. Just breaking it down, though, looking at where we've been so we can make a plan for where do we go from here. You can see suspensions again by grade level bands. And then finally, the last section that we'll look at is attendance and graduation rates. So something that's a little bit different, maybe that's written into the strategic plan, is the indicator there mentions 12 or fewer unexcused absences. And so I think it's important for us to come around this idea of chronic absenteeism. And chronic absenteeism is a term that's used nationally and really reflects when students miss 10% or more of the days that they should have been in school. And so that is how, as a state, we define it as well. And so typically in a given year for a student who's in attendance for the entire year, depending on your district, of course, that can be somewhere around that 15-day mark, 12 to 15. And what we know from research about chronic absenteeism is that children who are chronically absent are far more likely to drop out of school. We know that kids who are chronically absent in their very early years of education, kindergarten, first and second grade, they tend to be less likely to hit that third grade mark of being able to read. And then what we also know about children who aren't able to read at their grade level when they're in third grade, the statistics show us that they're 4 times more likely to drop out of high school. And so this idea that chronic absenteeism is important, K-12, is critical. It's how we're going to be able to also keep our kids in school. The other piece of that is it's not just about those early years, but it's also about those latter years, because as you can see from the second bullet, that irregular attendance in high school, if for every middle school and high school year that a student has an incident of being chronically absent, they are 7 times more likely to drop out of school than their peers. So it's critical, K-12, that we really pay attention to absenteeism and thinking about how all of us can wrap around our students in that way. And then obviously we know that students who are chronically absent also have greater difficulty after they leave us as well. Later in life, they have more difficulty. So when we look at our chronic absenteeism, again, looking at that 10% mark, you can see that we have a spike in high school. And that's very typical nationally. They're nationally, every race, every ethnicity at the high school year is a dramatic spike, and something that we can come around and try to identify what is it that we can do to help our students stay engaged. And I do think some of what we're learning right now, even in this time of COVID and distance learning, there's opportunity there that we can also think about how might we do school differently for some of our kids who are struggling with chronic absenteeism. And then that leads us to graduation rates. And typically, what you can see across the board, our graduation rates in the Fargo Public Schools have stayed pretty consistent. And on one hand, I guess we could talk about, gosh, for all of the efforts that we've put in, why haven't graduation rates increased? On the other hand, I guess we can also say, gosh, because of all of the efforts that we've put in over the years, we haven't seen graduation rates decrease. But it needs to continue to be part of our conversation. And so all of that data kind of summarizing really our next steps related specifically in some broad sweeps to this initiative. We are working on developing a more specific. Last year was the first year that we offered the opportunity to have outside agencies coming into schools to provide mental health services. We shared that with you last year. We had about 50 students that were able to access that mental health therapy in schools who otherwise would not have been able to access that outside of school. And so we're working with those partnerships as well to talk about how can we do this better while we continue to also provide what the school setting is meant to provide, and that's the student's education. And then, as I mentioned, we're continuing that work with restorative practices around the circle coaches and being school-wide with with restorative practices in all of our buildings. PBIS training at our high school, we're just on the cusp with that leadership team talking about what's this going to look like and developing that behavior reporting form. And then as you know from the operational plan that was approved at the last meeting, 2 of the programs that directly feed into this, the Student Wellness Family Facilitator and the Positive Behavior Program that's available in 10 of our elementary buildings, are 2 of the programs that we'll be evaluating to talk about, are we getting the results that we want to see? Might we make changes that allow us to see even better results? And then another piece, it's not necessarily my piece to speak of because Tamara Usselman has spent a lot of time working on it, but it does feed into this initiative and really talking about how do we best develop these equitable outcomes for American Indian students so that we have more of them graduating. And she has developed really a thorough plan that we continue to have conversations around and implement with hopes of seeing good progress, that we can continue to use that model, it's called the BAR model, to have additional conversations about how do we wrap around the whole child and continue to have parents involved to increase everybody's involvement in the student's education. So with that, I would open up for any questions or ask any Dr. Gandhi or rest of the cabinet if there's anything further that you'd like to provide.
Thank you so much. I see Robin has her hand up.
Okay, Jen, you know how important this is to me. So I have 4 questions. I think you asked the first one, what is the interface between what you do and with Tamara Usselman? So that is spot on. I think your department probably has the greatest effect on our graduation rates. So I know your passion and I know your commitment, and I'm very happy that you're here. My first question is, when do we expect, or are they already, the SEL standards adopted at the state level?
It's a really good question. So I have not heard specifically that there will be state standards around SEL. Our REAs around the state have been working really hard, and what we have to guide us at this point are SEL learning goals and scales that most of our districts have adopted. They continue to be refined, but I've not heard, I guess at this point, that they will be state standards.
Second question is, do you feel that these are manageable caseloads for your SWIFTs?
We are doing our best to manage. So as school social workers, that best case scenario is 50 students at a time. And that is pretty close to what we were able to run last year. It does mean sometimes we have to do some waiting, and depending on new referrals that come in, we might have to ask a counselor for some additional support. But we're not exactly sure what the outcome really will be yet of COVID, but we're managing at this point.
And my final question is, when you, on result number 5, when you gave the report about incident reports, these are clearly duplicated numbers. I would be really interested to see what non-duplicated numbers are.
By student, you mean? How many
Yes.
students?
Yep.
Rupak, do you have something to add?
Not. Jen, I have 3 questions, sorry. I think first just want to start with kudos to you and your team. I think there's no secret in our district the value of SWIFTs and how hard they work to make sure that they're supporting all of our educators and providing the services for our students. So I know that we continue to be blown away by everything our SWIFTs want to do, and sometimes to the point where we're saying we're worried about just how hard our SWIFTs are working, because I don't think their phones ever turn off. So I think I want to recognize that in the work that you're doing as well. I'll just go through my 3 things, and then if you can just answer them whatever. One was, would you mind just maybe talking briefly about your partnership with our EL department and our EL counselors as well, to make sure that language barrier is not a barrier for our students receiving wraparound services that they need with the SWIFTs, because I know that they work closely to that. And then 2 questions. One was on the chronic absenteeism, the data that was presented from the difference from 2018-2019 school year to last year. Was that October through May, or was that October, or only up till March?
Right, so chronic absenteeism from last year took into account for elementary trimester 1 and 2.
Okay.
And for secondary quarters 1 through 3,
Got it.
not during COVID.
Awesome. And this one I know I'm going to be more direct than maybe you want to be, but I think it's important for the board members to know, because 2 years ago at the legislative session, we advocated for social emotional support and talked about how underfunded some of those supports are as a school district. And one of the conversations that came out of that biennium was all around restructuring the Department of Human Services to be able to provide more supports for schools. And I know that's a long-term project, and they're collaborating with schools. Would you be able to speak to, has there been any realized impact for us as a district in terms of that would really reduce our caseload, or we haven't seen that impact yet?
So starting with your last question, we haven't seen that impact yet. The one piece that I can say the impact that we have seen is there is an intentional effort for partnership, and I'm very excited about that. It feels as though our local zone is excited and willing to come to the table and have conversations about how we can collectively work together. And so that's the bit of impact that we're seeing at this point. But yeah, they're very early in their restructuring, and still they too are trying to work through the pandemic. So I anticipate and I'm hopeful that more impact is yet to come. And then going back to your first question regarding our English language learners, last year when I made the mention that we went from a team of 6 to a team of 9, and that was intentional. We brought on our EL social workers onto the SWIFT team, and so we have 3 of our SWIFTs who are very well-versed and bring a plethora of knowledge related to working with families who are EL. In addition to that, this year, rather than just having those social workers be the contacts for our EL families, we're working hard to provide the training that the rest of our SWIFTs need, so that all of us can respond and support all of our families when the need arises. And then also, we have regular conversations with the directors and those that are directly involved with providing education and planning for EL. So we do spend a lot of time in conversation, and at this point we are working to beef up the skill set of all of our SWIFTs to feel comfortable working with all of our families.
Thank you. And does there need to be a follow-up regarding your last question, Robin?
Sure, whenever. Just a written email is fine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And David, I think you had some questions.
Jennifer, thank you for the presentation. Unfortunately, I could not see your slides, and I depend on these very, very small numbers on this sheet of paper. In my mind, I can boil this whole presentation of yours down to the last slide, and that's one on graduation rates. Our graduation rate now is running still around 83%. Is that close? Mm-hmm. Okay.
84.
Okay. Now, I think, and this is just my opinion, but I think that if you were to track the students who are involved in those incident reports, the ones who have been suspended, and the ones who are suffering chronic absenteeism, I'd be very surprised to find out that those are not the same students that are dropping out. And I think I heard you correctly when you said that the primary indicator, if you want to use that word, that they're going to potentially drop out is that they're not reading at grade level by third grade, correct?
What we do know is that when kids aren't reading at grade level by third grade, that they are more likely to drop out. So when you look at the continuum, we also have to be concerned, though, about those kids who have chronic absenteeism even later in life. So they could be those students could be average grade readers, but if they are struggling to attend in 8th through 12th grade, they too increase their chances of dropping out for each incident.
So you would say that you have there would be some students who would be average readers who are suffering chronic absenteeism, but that wouldn't be a large number, would it? Or can't you?
Yeah, I don't know if I could specifically state that, because what we do know is that we have a number of kids that we work with who are struggling with mental health difficulties, who are very, very capable and performing can perform academically with their peers.
Okay. Well, I guess my whole point then is that every single year we talk about dropout rates and the fact that it's absolutely not acceptable. You know, we're having well over 100 kids that don't finish high school, and we know the consequences of that. And luckily, some of them come back and get their GEDs, and everything turns out all right for them. But we've got to figure out some way to get these kids through high school to begin with. And I guess this is the first time that I was awake enough to hear you say that this third grade is a real milestone. And I guess maybe this could be directed more at Missy than at you, but we've got to assure that we've got 100% kids working at grade level by the time they're in third grade. And I know 100% is an irrational number, but 83% isn't a rational number to be graduating either.
Missy, would you like to add something?
I would. One piece that we just have to keep in mind is that we have a very mobile population. So I agree that we have to keep increasing how we reach kids through third grade, but we have to look at it for the whole system, because we have kids that come into us at 5th grade, at 7th, at 9th with low spots, right, that will have to meet their need. When I was in a different district, we looked at our alternative high school and made an assumption that it was reading. We went through and did a diagnostic on the kids, and it was only about a third that really needed that reading. And it really had to do with them not feeling of belonging and part of something. And that's that relationship part in the social emotional learning. So it is complex as we look at it, but I just wanted to add that that system for meeting that reading benchmark has to be integrated through the whole thing, through Jen's department of that MTSS A and B.
Yep, David has a follow-up, Rupak, and then Brian.
And Jen and Missy, I wasn't targeting, I'm sorry, that came off a little too harsh. I wasn't targeting Fargo. I think that, and Missy brings up a really good point when she says that we've got kids that are coming in from other schools. I think it has to be a goal in the primary grades. We have to be focusing more on reading and comprehension so that they feel adequately compared and comfortable later in the later classes. And one of the things that's interesting about what we've done with the COVID-19, my wife works with a lot of teachers, and the elementary teachers in this area overall seem quite happy with the way things are going. Number one, because of the reduced class size and the fact that they are being able to focus more on their kids when they've got half the numbers of kids. And that, you know, maybe that should be an eye-opener for us. Maybe we should be focusing very, very strongly on how we can reduce class size in primarily, you know, most certainly in the primary grades, but giving teachers time to work with individual students so that we can assure that those reading goals are being achieved.
Rupak, and then Brian.
Sure. David, thank you for this conversation. I think this is the exact conversation our board should be having. I think I just want to provide some context around the data as well, specifically to graduation rate. We have work to do in Fargo Public Schools, and I think until, which is very hard to do, but until we hit 100% graduation rate for 100% of our students, I think there's always room for growth. So no denial of that. But I also think that as we dive deeper into this conversation, it's important to delineate, make a couple of delineations. One is that we have an overall graduation rate, and then we probably have a separate graduation rate when we look at our comprehensive high schools and then our alternative high school as well. And that's completely okay, because our alternative high schools, a lot of times the students aren't there until they're later in their high school career as well. So in addition to separating those two pieces of data, it would also be prudent for us to take a look at, while graduation rates, have they stayed the same? Has our 6-year graduation rate gone down, 5-year graduation gone down, or have those numbers gone up, whereas our dropout rate has gone down? Because at the end of the day, completion of the K-12 curriculum and going through that is, I think, more important than dropping out completely. And I know that that's something that's been a focus for our alternative school as well. So tracking those pieces of information with looking at the mobility rate of our students would be extremely important as well. And I think chronic absenteeism is research-based in terms of one of the biggest impacts on academic achievement. And I think even for us, as we dive deeper into that data and take a look at where are there potential opportunities for us, we should be able to delineate between the chronic absenteeism prior to a student entering maybe our alternative high school, because there were probably different circumstances that didn't work out for them in their traditional comprehensive high school, and then what they did after they were provided that opportunity for more of a self-paced learning environment with a more flexible schedule. And I think the conversation the board can then have is, how do we get on the preventative end, where a student doesn't have to be unsuccessful at a comprehensive high school before they go to an alternative high school, or how do we provide that model? But I think those are some of the different things, and just want to provide context around those data points.
Thank you, Dr. Gandhi. Brian and Robin, did you also have a comment? Okay.
Yeah, Jen, Fargo Public School isn't the only district that has troubles with these issues and things. It's nationwide, it's statewide and stuff. Do you have other colleagues across the state and other districts across the nation that are using things that are working, practices and things like that to help these problems?
Yeah, I think we're all in a similar situation. We do a lot of collaborating, and everybody's trying something and collecting data. And it really does, it tends to be fluid, just like our kids. The needs of our students continues to change. And so we learn, we share, we're trying. Has somebody found, the silver bullet? Not yet.
Robin?
Agreeing with David, at the Boys and Girls Club, we have smaller groups just because we have to. We're operating at lower capacity. We are finding that incident behavior reports are virtually non-existent. Mm-hmm. So I would be very interested to see to capture some actual data of what is happening right now with behavior, relationship building, a sense of belonging, whether there's pre and post surveys, because the relationship building is, I think Missy hit it right on the head. A sense of belonging is what keeps kids in school. So maybe that's something you want to study going forward. Hopefully we're not in this situation much longer, but I think we will be delightfully surprised. It's more expensive, but maybe it's worth it to get those graduation rates up.
Seth, and does anyone else have anything after Seth? Jennifer?
I just would like to know if we have the ability to track data of the reason why kids are dropping out of school. Because I also would assume that there has to be plenty of reasons why they're dropping out of school that are out of our control. So I was wondering if there's any way that or if that data is collected, like, is it available, or do we not have the ability to collect that data, or can we do that?
I think that's a good question. I'm not really sure. I don't know, if we're having interviews or conversations at the high schools or wherever along the way that may be happening.
Yeah, I think we may have some when we reach out to our principals, or from when students are dropped out. I can't, going back to my principal days, I can't tell you that we would have 100% of those situations, because sometimes what we'll see is the biggest dropout is when we start the school year, and sometimes we'll have a no-show list after a certain day, and then we have to go and try to track those down where we can or we can't, and sometimes those students have enrolled in another district and we just haven't had a records request to confirm it. So I think in the situation, if a student's telling us and working with their counselor, like, hey, this isn't gonna work for me, we're gonna do everything we can. And if they say that we want to take a different route, whether it be a GED or something, I think in those situations, we'll probably have that data. Probably have to work with our principals or counselors, but I can't say that we have a systemic way to capture that, because not all the time we know where all the students went.
Dr. Gandhi. Dr. Gross has risen as well. Welcome, Dr. Gross.
Well, thank you. I guess I would just like to add to that, as we have the conversations, anytime a student goes to a principal, goes to a counselor, goes to someone in the building, to have those conversations about this is what my plans may be. Those are the conversations, the exact conversations that are happening, and those are the conversations that the principal, the counselor, the social worker is working with those students to talk about what barriers can we take out of the way, what is it that you are lacking, what is it that you need to help you be successful. Many times we can put those pieces in place, sometimes we cannot. But yes, do we have those conversations? We certainly do. Do we have that as a systemic way to share with you what those data points are? We do not, because it's those personal conversations. But I do want to go back to what Dr. Gandhi was talking about, is the data that's on the screen here talks about a typical four-year graduation rate. And for some students, it just is time that they need in order to be successful. So on the North Dakota Insight website, where you can find data on any of the districts in North Dakota, our four-year graduation rate is 84%. If you look at the five-year graduation rate, it's now 86%. The six-year graduation rate is 89%. And the seven-year graduation rate is 90%. So sometimes it is just more time that our students need to be successful. It could be one of the barriers that is in place, and we try to extend that time whenever possible for our students.
Thank you for that. Jennifer.
Thank you. So my number one question as I was taking notes through your presentation, Jennifer, thank you, was, do we understand the why? And I think that this is a perfect example and a great conversation to really drill down to, are we being intentional in understanding why our graduation rates are what they are, and what initiatives specifically can we put in place, much like you do within the SWIFT's department, for example, and able to show growth and change or opportunities for our students. Same with the graduation rates, because I think we can make lots of assumptions, but until we truly understand the why, we won't be able to establish targeted initiatives as well as reach, the highest goal possible. So this is a great example of when I'm always asking for data-driven decisions. This is exactly what I mean. This is how we get better for our kids. So thank you.
Anyone else have questions? I did have one. I was wondering about I had more than one, but I'll ask one. When students are referred for mental health therapy, what happens when we hit a roadblock regarding insurance?
And that's where our SWIFTs really do come into play. They work hard to help them get registered for medical assistance if that's something that they're needing, or just working with the agencies who have sliding scales. There's a variety of different opportunities even within the community, and our SWIFTs are excellent about being able to navigate all of those pieces. And just when we make that connection, our social workers do stay with that family until they're stabilized. So making that connection doesn't equal stability. So they do continue to work with that family through that process until they reach that level of stability.
Great, thank you. And I can follow up with some other questions individually. Did anyone, Jennifer, you had one more?
I have one more, actually, and I'm not sure, Jennifer, if you can answer this or if Missy might, but be able to. But there was mention around partnering with the Department of Human Services. And I believe there may have been some sort of partnering around a grant opportunity, just kind of checking the status of that. Maybe Missy, I see her coming up to the podium.
I did call Pam Sagnes, and she did say that we should probably talk again, but they were a little slower at rolling out. And Jen, they're still, is that the only grant I know of was in August, they talked about rolling out. It hasn't, nothing else? Did that one come out though even? Yeah, so we don't even have the application. So I don't know if COVID slowed it down or not, but the piece that I think they were spending a lot of time on was 915I. Thank you, 1915I, and we do think we will benefit auxiliary from it. So they are talking about a funding stream for partners, for example, Solutions, PATH, some of these organizations to provide targeted case management or wraparound service. And so that is exciting because they're going to be able to take away some of the barriers so more children qualify. And then we usually work in partnership with those individuals, but we are excited for the grant they have coming that we just haven't been able to apply for yet.
Thank you.
Dr. Gandhi.
And then we did, Missy, can you talk, we did receive the one state partnership grant last year through the REA for the model schools for targeted case management at Jefferson for wraparound services.
Oh, yes, that is our 5-year grant at Jefferson, and one of the pieces that we were able to do with them is we have a full-time PATH worker at Jefferson. Half their time is coordinating community partnerships. And so that is where we really get to see if we have a point person to do some of those things, if that helps us provide more service. The second half of that is I think it's a caseload of about 6 to 8 students that they targeted case manage. And so we're in year 2 with that grant.
Robin?
Real quick, you talked a little bit about insurance and having behaviors and solutions come. That was a result of a lot of the work through the last legislative session. So we need to keep focusing on that this year, and as GAC chair, that relationship between Department of Health is something we need to continue to foster. So please let us know if you need some help on that.
And I guess I will mention that Jen and I were able to meet with some local providers at the table to look at how we keep developing the partnerships. I will say that they were absolutely wonderful to sit down with. I think I was a little nervous, just saying, how are we going to do this? And they were so open to say, what barriers are you running into? How can we work through that? So we're going to bring that group back together again.
Good to hear. Thank you so much. Very important report, generates always many questions. Thank you so much. We do not have anyone that has signed up in terms of speaking to the board this evening, which is our next item on the agenda. After that, we would go on to the consent agenda. I'm wondering if we need a short break. Short break, 5 minutes, all right? And then we'll come back and handle the consent agenda. I think we're all here. Okay, moving on to the consent agenda. Is there a motion for approval?
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion for approval and a second of the consent agenda. All in favor signify by saying yes.
Yes.
Opposed? Motion passes. On to business. The first item is the 2020-21 budget final approval. It's memo 47. And Jim would like to take this.
Thank you, Rebecca. Couple of things to give you a global highlight, and of course Jackie's here to answer any detailed questions that are stumpers for me. On the general fund, we had an adjustment from our previous approval in July, primarily due to getting the finalization of our staffing, some tuition expenses that increased due to student participation in the virtual academy, and some utility bill increases due to increasing the airflow in the buildings to address some of the COVID concerns. So overall, we're going to see a balanced general fund budget presented tonight, and we'd be levying 126.78 mils. On the building fund, the net change resulted from a decrease in the revenue to reflect the final proceeds on the sale of the Explorer Academy bonds. As you all recall from a couple meetings ago, those came back very attractive for us, and a decrease of 1.3 million and change to the project phase completion of the building fund construction projects that are underway. And again, we'll be levying 15 mils for the building fund. There have been no changes to the special assessment or special levy fund from the July presentation that was the preliminary approval. The only change on the debt service fund has to do with the reflecting of the final amortization schedule for the Explorer Academy bonds. And really the biggest probably change in this budget is nutrition services. I think everybody's aware of the fact that due to federal efforts, we are offering free meal service at this point in time to all of our students. We also, because of COVID, have a limited menu selection, and obviously many students are picking up meals, those that might be not in school on a particular day. So we had a significant decrease in revenue and expenditures in the nutrition service budget. When you add them all together, we are going to be levying 154.38 mils, and I'm going to move that we adopt these final budgets, levying a total of 154.38 mils for the 2020-21 school year, and instruct the administration to submit the certificate of levy to the county auditor.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Motion by Jim, seconded by Brian. Any discussion? Jim?
I'll just point out one factor. We have no choice. We can stay here all night, but we have to adopt this evening because we have a statutory deadline that our business manager has to meet with the county, which is why it's on tonight's agenda.
Thanks for that reminder, Jim. Any questions? Jennifer?
So can I ask a clarification under what you just said, Jim? So if we didn't adopt it, we would have to just call a special meeting? There would be time to do so?
Yeah,
So-
we could call a special meeting. We have to certify it, I want to say by like October 4th. It's
Yeah.
before our next regular school board meeting. Or it has to be certified over to the county by then.
Yeah, and I only asked just in case there are other board members that have questions or concerns about a special, or a certain area. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Jennifer. Anyone else have questions, comments? Robin?
Simple question. There are a lot of numbers on here. What is the value of a mill right now in Fargo? Sorry to put you on the spot.
I'm going to ask Jackie to give us that. I'm going to get it wrong.
All right, we are going to welcome Jackie Gapp to the podium.
Okay.
The estimated, or the ending number, I believe we're going to have is 435 million, roughly. The county did have to change in how they present that information. They used to, and I may get it backwards, they used to deduct our veterans credit and our homestead credit to get kind of a net, and now it's reported as a gross. Really doesn't have, in the end, any effect on what we are charged per mill. So we will be, it's just over about a 4% increase over the prior year. It's going to come in a little different, but it's close enough to what we had originally budgeted that we don't need to, I didn't see a need to have to adjust any of those lines.
So just a different reporting format. I'm
How
old school. How much is a mill?
Right,
So,
so $435,000
okay.
is a mill.
Seth?
I just have one question, and I'm assuming that the answer is the virtual academy, and that's the $2.3 million change to the instructor salary. Is that, am I right in that assumption?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you know, I know it looks like a large change when we're talking about what we budgeted back in May for positions based on who was in those positions at that time, and the not knowing at that point even how many people would be retiring or leaving us. You know, you're basing that off of that value, which rolls forward, while oftentimes, and especially I think in this year, maybe there were quite a few terminations or resignations, retirements, for whatever reason they chose. In addition, you know, we are down 200 kindergarten students. So that has an effect of, I mean, almost 10 teachers. In a perfect world, of course, they're scattered throughout. And then the students at the high school level who are taking courses through the Center for Distance Ed instead of with us as well. You know, there's, we still have open positions to fill. Another big area that really kind of hit that line, we entered into a contract for our speech language pathology services because we can't find any employees or are having a tough time hiring them. So those costs then ended up shifting out of what we anticipated to be salaries and benefits into a contracted services line. In addition, we end up spending quite a bit, often with the Autism Center as well, for the same reasons, where we'd love to hire the staff, but it's difficult to find people.
Robin?
So the ESSER funds that I assume we received last spring, are they spread out through the revenue lines in the federal programs budget?
Right, they are. So yes, you have two sets of budgets. When we did the initial budget approved it in June, there were so many unknowns and no finalized amounts for probably 99% of our grant funds that they weren't presented at that time. So attached is, after the general fund, which doesn't include grant funds, is the one that states all. And so the ESSA funds are in there. Or the ESSER funds, I should say, trying to get them, they're lumping into some of the other categories. The other thing I'd like to point out is things are changing rapidly, even on the finance side. This budget that you were looking at also does not include now, because we just received the notice of the amount, the Education Corps dollars that were funneled through to us. And that's about another $2.5 million we received that we are supposed to spend by December 31st. So we are working diligently to try to figure out ways to spend that money within a 3-month period of time. So you will be most likely seeing quite a few revisions come through throughout the year, I think, as it progresses, as we get new funding, as deadlines come, go, hopefully get extended for additional time. And we move money around, right? Even some of the expenses we incurred this summer, doing meals and curriculum writing and some of the PD that took place will probably move, right? So we can utilize some of that CARES Act money and not our regular general fund, so we're able to try to spend it all. It's really a moving target.
Jackie, the dollars that you just referenced, the Education Corps Fund, what amount is that again? It needs to be used up
It's
by
about $2.5 million is what we're receiving, just under that. It goes back until July 1st, so, you know, first line of defense is always go see what you spent that you can now utilize and falls under those categories. In addition, we have some plans for additional staffing, additional support. It has to be, it can only be spent in 3 areas, that's salaries, benefits, and contracted services. So as well, that puts you in quite a predicament. No supplies, no product type things, so no, you can't purchase like a class product. You can't purchase algebra, right? You have to contract a service with it. So do you want anything to add, Dr. Gani? We've been working on that, all of us, for probably 2 weeks now, trying to narrow down what we can do and what we want to try to accomplish.
Sure, yeah, I think even the contracted services with those dollars have to be contracted services for a staffing-related purpose. So it really puts us in a very difficult situation, because what they're asking us to do is use those dollars only for a staffing-related service, but only available till December 31st, with no guarantee that an extension will be available until at least November 3rd. So as of now, what we are asked to do is use these additional dollars for staffing, but then we can't commit the staffing past December 31st, because then we would be incurring those costs for a full-time FTE as a district, and we don't want to put ourselves in that situation either. So the best use of those dollars that we can explore, and we're still working through it, are potential stipend, overtime opportunities, but then even if there are employees that need to be hired, utilizing those dollars, they would have to be a fixed-term employment, only guaranteed until December 31st, or if we're able to find a way to guarantee their employment through the rest of the year with their general fund dollars, but then not absorb that position into the budget for the following year.
Thank you for that. So it illustrates an example of, like you said, Jackie, how this is going to be shifting around quite a bit.
Yeah, there will be a lot of, I anticipate quite a few revisions. Are they going to be material enough to bring to planning or the board? I'm not quite sure. But we will definitely see changes throughout the year in how we're funding.
Rupak and then Jennifer.
Sorry, I think I forgot the most important piece that I should have said. When I say those dollars can be used for staffing, that's, those dollars can be used for staffing, but we can't, obviously we have to follow federal rules for not supplanting, meaning the staffing has to be, we have to be able to show that it's an additional staffing because of COVID. So if it's a position that we were going to hire the previous year, we can't use those dollars for it. So that's probably the most important piece to that.
Thank you for that. Jennifer?
Thank you. So I have 2 questions, Jackie. In looking at the transportation category, there has been like another substantial increase, right? And we ended, it looks like, 2.8 million. Preliminary budget and adopted budget is up to 3.6. But when I look at the subtotal, 7.7 million, and now we're 9 million and 9.8. I mean, can we talk about transportation a little bit?
Right, now realize that there's other things, we probably should rename this category. It's not just transportation that's in there. Right now, the tuition is in there that we will be paying the North Dakota Center for Distance Ed. Again, that's going to change because I plan to use some of these other funding. But if you look at the line 561 on page 2 of 3, you'll see an $850,000 increase. So what we're doing is our high school students who are taking those courses, we will pay for up to 6 courses, and Bob can correct me because I think I ask him this every week to make sure I have it right. 2 courses at a time for each semester. So we've kind of calculated that out. I believe they're about $180, $175 a course. But then if they need to do conditioning or Phi Ed, that could be an addition as well. So do you want to add anything on that?
Certainly. For our virtual academy, what we've decided to do is, like was stated, is use the North Dakota Center for Distance Ed. They also offer AP level coursework and dual credit coursework. And we wanted to make sure that any of our high school students who wanted to take advantage of either one of them, who during their typical school year would have done dual credit or distance learning. So we've allowed for students to enroll in those classes as well. Because we want students to be able to earn up to 6 credits, like their typical peers might, so that they could be on track for graduation, what we've asked them to do is enroll in 2 classes at a time, unless one of them is an AP or dual credit course, or a world language course, or a physical education course. Because all of those need basically an entire semester of time in order to be as successful as possible. So students who are in one of those 4 areas may take up to 3 courses at one time. One of those dual credit AP, world language, Phi-Ed, and then 2 other credits. And then as soon as they are close to successfully completing one of those classes, they are enrolled in 1 more and then 1 more until we get to that number of 6, because we want students to be on track for graduation.
And I do literally ask him that every week, I think. So I'm clear. So there will be a significant cost there that we will be paying out to the Center for Distance Ed for those classes for those students.
Any other questions? Jennifer?
One more. Actually, if I may ask a follow-up, and then I'll ask my second question. So the significant cost increase for the distance education, we're looking at a few $1,000,000 here in the budget. How does that affect your current staffing budget, if at all?
Ooh, that's probably a Bob.
Sorry, Bob.
That's a Bob question again.
So at the middle school, what we did is we staffed our virtual academy with our own staff. So we found 12 teachers who then became virtual academy instructors, which then required our middle school principals to reschedule the middle school and redesign where students then would be assigned, or which teachers they may be assigned to right before the school year started. So our middle school principals and our registrars did an amazing job to get that accomplished. At the high school level, because we had a very unique array of courses, we were not able to do that as well or as easily. So we have smaller class sizes at this time at the high school, because in some areas, if, for example, a biology course, there were a number of students who chose to go virtual academy and were then part of the North Dakota Center for Distance Ed, there's still another cadre of students who are still in the high school taking those courses. And we did not want to take anything away from our high school age students, because again, we want them to be on track for graduation. We want to make sure that their career pathway was solid and that they had options and the courses that they needed available to them. So the staffing at the high school level remained pretty constant. Class size probably is a little bit smaller than it would have been in the past. At the middle school, we used our own middle school instructors for our virtual academy teachers.
One more question?
Yes, thank you. Then my last question is around the ending fund balance, just recognizing that there's an increase there. So if we could address that or talk about that.
You know, I think with the closure that occurred last year, there were a lot of expenditures that did not happen that would have had we stayed in session through the end of the year. As well as summer school, a significant decrease in costs this past summer, just due to the environment that we're in. I think we would have ended pretty close, or closer, although I believe that's still within 1% of the budget. So, but it would have been less. Transportation being probably the largest area that we, did not have, and we will feel that effect a little bit this year because our funding from the state will be less because of that. Although we still are running the same number of routes, the same cohorts, as they planned all of that out. We didn't see any changes. I guess the good thing is we didn't see the need to have to increase routes as well for that, which is a positive. So I think as well, some of these additional dollars that we receive, because we're talking so far almost $5 million. Now the initial funding that we received for the ESSER portion of that on the CARES Act goes until 2022. So we have a long time that we can plan for that and continue to cover some of these additional costs until such time that hopefully, right, COVID is not as big as it is right now, and will allow us to get back to how we operated before. So, I think the budget that's before you, it is balanced. I think it will be tight, especially with so many unknowns that are happening. Although with that additional funding, it may free up, some other dollars as well. But things come up constantly where we find we have to spend money where we didn't have to before.
Brian?
And I'm comfortable with the ending fund balance. I think that's good. As long as it's not more than the 35% of our expenses, we're in great shape. So this is I thought it was a good budget, and lots of figuring. This was not a normal thing for you guys to have to get through this, so kudos to you and your staff for getting through this and working as a team, so thank you.
Thanks.
All right, I don't see any other hands, so it looks like we're ready to vote. Anne Marie?
Paulson?
Yes.
Benson?
No.
Gullickson?
Yes.
Holden?
Yes.
Johnson?
Yes.
Brian Nelson?
Yes.
Robin Nelson?
Yes.
Newman?
Yes.
Knutson?
Yes. Motion passes. Item B, Guided Practice Centers, Memo 48. Dr. Gandhi, would you like to introduce this?
Sure. This was, board members, this was an agenda item that I had asked to be placed on the board meeting recently, just because of kind of the situation with COVID-19. I think when we presented at our July work session, our FPS Smart Restart Plan, we were extremely excited at the time about the opportunity to provide a guided practice center to our families and our students for their distance learning days. We continue to be optimistic about providing that opportunity. And although we were able to figure out a lot of the logistics to be able to provide that, one of the things that we just thought that we would be able to do and we can't is find the appropriate individuals to staff the Guided Practice Center. I think in the last 2 weeks, to be able to staff the Guided Practice Center, even so we had 900 students apply. Based on space, we accepted 560 applications. We were going to be able to do it with using some of the spaces at our elementary schools, so use the spaces at our elementary schools and then use 11 classrooms at Agassiz. To be able to do that, we would have had to pull, which we were ready to do, and we'd worked with principals, at least one para-educator from each of our buildings, and then hire, I think, upwards of 10 additional individuals to be able to staff the Guided Practice Center. Well, while it was not a difficult conversation, while it was a difficult conversation with our paras, one of the things that we're struggling with right now is that our sub-fill rate for para-educators is north of 50% in our district. So even pulling one para was a struggle, but we were willing to do that. But then even the additional 10 individuals that we had to hire for this to be proctors at the Guided Practice Center, in 2 weeks' time that we posted the position, we've only had 2 applicants. We have reached out to retired teachers. We've actually reached out to high school students to see if that's something that they want to do on their distance learning days, and we just can't find the staff for the Guided Practice Centers, and that's been extremely challenging for us. We even went as far as Doug contacted temporary placement agencies who were then charging a premium of, I think, up to $6 per person, which would then just go out of our price range to be able to provide that opportunity for our students. The second piece to that is that there continues to be research that comes down around the potentials for hybrid instruction in terms of COVID-19 that can be worse off than in-person instruction if the students during their distance learning days are taking advantage of opportunities to mix with other cohorts. And had we provided the Guided Practice Center where we would have had 11 classrooms worth of students at 12 students to 1 come to Agassiz, they would have been mixing with students from other groups. And Fargo Cast told us that that in itself can be a potential barrier to our end goal of getting back in-person instruction. So really, because of staffing and because of the inability to be able to do it with the same protocols that we can at the schools, we are asking the board to adopt our recommendation that we no longer provide the Guided Practice Center. We know that that's going to be a difficulty for our parents and our families, and it's something that we wanted to do. We just don't have the staff or anyone applying to be able to do that.
Thank you for that, Rupak. I am looking for a motion to move this forward. Brian?
I move that the Board of Education approve a change in the Fargo Public School Smart Restart Plan to no longer offer guided practice centers due to staffing and COVID-19 concerns.
Second.
All right, there was a motion by Brian and seconded by Robin. Is there any discussion? Tracy and then Jennifer?
Thank you. Just a clarifying question, because this is kind of a nice segue. We just listened to Jackie explain that we have these excess care dollars, I think it was, for spending. So it's not that we can't pay staff, it's just that we cannot find staff. Is that, or is it that that funding would end after December 31st and you're worried?
No, we can't find staff.
Okay, so
apply.
when you say you reach out to temp agencies and it was above your price range, I mean, it seems like we have money to spend, so I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think I would say that even the money that we have to spend, we are going to find uses for the CARES dollars to do some of the other things and support the staff that we have. This would significantly dive into that budget and not allow us to do some of those other things. And I think Doug can quote me on the exact price for what it was from the temp agencies, but it was a pretty big cost.
Tracy, while you're thinking, or it looks like you might be thinking on another question or a comment, Jennifer, did you have a comment? And we could go back to Tracy if you'd like.
Yes, and this will be obviously, well, let me just ask it. So there were about 560 students that were they told they could participate. Have they been notified? And then what happens for those
They would be
kids?
notified if the board were to approve this motion.
So they don't know that this is happening. They're still, right now, as of today, believe that they have this option.
Correct. We have not notified anyone because we didn't know what was going to happen today.
Let's see, Doug, did you have the information that we were looking for that might help Tracy with her question?
I think I'm trying to remember the exact rates. There's two ways that we could work with the temp agency. One was, I think it was about $6, like a premium per hour up to a certain amount of hours. I think it was 280 that we could have those employees work for us, and they'd be part of our employees. If there was a different option where they would, basically they aren't our employees, they would be that temp agency's employees, but we would pay a higher premium. I think that was $15 to $20 extra, basically an hour above and beyond what we would pay them. So both came with a premium, one a little bit more expensive than the other.
David and then Jennifer.
I've got a couple of questions, but as long as you're at the podium, Doug, then what would have happened if we would have reached out to prospective employees with a higher rate of pay, somewhere between what the temp agencies would have been charging us and what we were eliciting?
Yep, and that was a conversation we actually had. I think one of the risks with doing that is when you offer a wage that maybe isn't in line with the duties and responsibilities that they're doing, you inadvertently offset other wages. So if we're going to pay proctors really because of market value demands, let's say we got to pay them $25 if we're going to recruit, what does that do for the wages for other types of employees within the district? So it really creates an inequity that we maybe wouldn't be able to manage otherwise.
Rupak, did you have a comment?
In addition to Doug's point, I think the other challenge for us is even if we were, let's move forward and advertise a position with a higher rate, the guided practice centers only happen when elementary is in hybrid. So also it's not a guaranteed position that any potential person would have to take. It would have to be contingent on the instructional model and for however long that instructional model is happening.
Jennifer.
So a couple of follow-up questions, if I may, Doug. So you mentioned the rate, but what were do you remember the total in terms of cost? Like, is it 2 million? Is it 3?
I don't.
Okay.
I don't have that right.
And while you're looking for that, I'm curious along the lines of David's question. I believe that, so I was told kind of through the grapevine, there was a partnership established with an agency like the YMCA or whomever has facility space and is probably taking care of students on their off days of school already. Would there be an opportunity to sort of, for these 560 kiddos that are probably going somewhere already part-time, for the district to subsidize that, since this won't be offered? Because I'm really struggling with the fact, I didn't support this idea in the beginning, but I have a really hard time just pulling the rug from these families.
Yeah, I can talk about that, and I'll probably ask Missy to come to the podium as well. We've definitely reached out to both of our major partnering organizations that provide nonprofit childcare in our schools. I think one of the differences between our school district and another school district that you might be referring to is the availability of space. So I know that the childcare service providers, which Missy might be able to talk to, are also struggling with staffing. We have reached out to them and talked to them. But another school district, so West Fargo, is able to provide their own space to provide their distance learning center for a small group of students, whereas we didn't have the ability to begin with in one location. Well, that wouldn't allow for that mixing of students.
Missy?
So what I had just on estimates, if we could hire 10 positions, which we're calling proctors, for the rest of the school year, it would be about $174,000. And so then if you double that, it'd be $348,000, and 30 would be $500,000. And so that's, I think what is difficult is originally we had secondary being distance, and we were going to repurpose paras at the secondary level. And so going hybrid and the desire to continuing to keep our secondary hybrid and looking at those things takes some people off the table. So we came back at it thinking we could hire because there were some dollars available, and we've had difficulty. When I've reached out and I have collaborated with Boys and Girls Club and the YMCA, we are all struggling to hire. And so that is one thing that's come up. So there are, I think, a few slots, I think they said at Fargo, for kids there. That's all I know, but not excessive amount.
David?
Did I miss a question?
Sorry, David?
I just want the board to know that I will not be voting in favor of this motion. The only thing that made this hybrid model that we're using in the elementary palatable enough for me to swallow was the fact that on the days that the kids were not in class with a professional, there would be a room that they could go to get professional help. Pulling the guided practice to me is totally unacceptable, and that feeling is shared by a great number of emails that I've been getting from parents who are telling us as a board how their kids are struggling not being face-to-face with teachers every day. I don't know. It's a very difficult situation. I can't see that it's not insurmountable. In my opinion, it's a temporary position, as Doug pointed out. If we have to pay more, we pay more. If we can get them, we get them, and we keep the guided practice, period.
Rupak, and I have a question. Sure. So both, if we were to pass this or not pass this, because I did support the guided practice center. That was one of the ways that I was able to support a vote for the Smart Restart Plan, was having this available. I knew that was it was based on what level we'd be in, but understanding that in hybrid that those younger students would have this additional assistance. So I'm curious, one way, of course, is if we switch the level that the students are attending school in, not we as a board, but the instructional plan committee, and that's going to be based on a variety of factors. But if all the stars align so that students are able to be in person more so, then great, it kind of solves this, but we don't know what's going to be happening. So my question is, what does the district see as our understanding that this is what was supported, this is what was approved? If it if we decide to go away from this, what is our responsibility? And if we don't change it, then what? Because if it doesn't get approved, it's saying we're still doing it. And so I would like to have some discussion both ways.
So I'll answer both, Rebecca, your question and David's question. I'll start with yours, Rebecca. I think what is the district's responsibility is the reason why this is a board action item. Do you believe the district has a responsibility to provide custodial care, even if your administrative staff is telling you that to do it, we would have to hire temporary individuals that I would assume have background checks, but we really haven't worked with or been able to go through our proper vetting process to get this up and going. What I'm telling you is that I don't think we can give you a guaranteed product at the same level that we thought we would be able to if we hired our own staff. The other piece to this conversation is that we've tried, I mean, we talked about reaching out to high school students and retired teachers and everyone else, and our goal was to be able to recruit and staff the guided practice centers because we championed for this, and that's an opportunity we want to provide. But there's also new research that's come out that's being shared with us by both North Dakota Department of Public Instruction, Department of Health, and by Fargo Cass Public Health that specifically is focusing around hybrid instruction. And what that research is telling us is that students that are going into a guided practice center that has mixed groups or daycares that have mixed groups, that can potentially create more risk concerns at the hybrid level than being able to put in some mitigation factors with full in-person instruction. That is why our committee talked about, should we look at a phase-in approach beginning October 19th? Not saying that's what the committee is going to decide, but that's where we want to work with our teachers and say, hey, let's look at this research that we have together, and at the elementary level, can in-person instruction through a plotting strategy be more effective? So if our end goal is to get all students back for in-person instruction in a safe and effective way, why would we create an additional barrier that would potentially increase the risk of contracting or transmitting the virus because it's now mixing cohorts and groups of kids versus 5 days in person? So I can't commit to 5 days in person because that's going to be a committee decision, but I can commit to that's where we want to get to, and we want to put in the right factors, and that's what the research is telling us.
Thank you, Dr. Gandhi. And again, I think what you were just describing was an example of like a solution, explaining some of the challenges. There are a variety of them in terms of offering the guided practice center. Thought that it was going to be a great thing. As we're learning that there are some additional challenges that we just didn't know that we would be met with. But also you are talking about a topic for discussion at that next instructional plan committee meeting where it will be acknowledged, it sounds like to me, that if this passes, if we're changing from this, I think what we're saying as a district is we still need to figure out how we're going to be paying attention to some of the additional needs of these children. And there can be it might not be through a guided practice center like we originally thought, but it could be potentially in a different way. It could be if we move out of the hybrid model, or I don't know how it would be arranged, but a way for students to still receive additional service in potentially the school that they are going to school in. Robin.
Maybe I can give some context on staffing, but this is unfortunate. Of course it's unfortunate, and I think we're all disappointed. From a staffing level with the YMCA and the Boys and Girls Clubs, we met extensively with Missy and her team, many, many conference calls. We frankly do not have the staff, and then our cohort groups during the day. Typically, we were served before school and after school, and we employ a lot of college students. They don't have that availability during the day, but we are serving the number of kids for the number of staff that we have. So kids are receiving care outside of, on their distance learning days, but not nearly as many as what would have been served here. Child care licensing regulations are actually more stringent than DPI's regulations. So that comes with a whole nother layer of regulations in it as well. But it was not for a lack of trying, and Missy got tired of us. We did a lot of conference calls, and I didn't realize this was coming. This was new to me. So disappointing, but I don't know what else to do. It sounds like it's about half of it is staffing and half of it is COVID-related from what I'm sensing.
Seth, Tracy, Jennifer.
I'm, really disappointed with this too. I'm struggling with it. I understand that, great ideas can not look so great when they're put into practice. And, if this is something that, helps us get back to school full bore much quicker, then I'm all for it. I'm just a little mixed up about voting for something that these 568 families didn't get a chance to voice their opinion on it before we're going to vote for it. If this is the recommendation of the board, I understand the recommendation, but I'm having a real tough time voting for something that we didn't give these people an opportunity to let them know, us as board members, how they feel about it.
Thank you, Seth. Tracy.
Thank you. I just wanted to add a few points. This also gives me pause ever since I've heard about it, and I've just really been going back and forth. I think RUPOC's points about the public health risk, though, are very real, and there is data to back that up, that we would be mixing cohorts. In some of our situations, it sounded like we were going to be pulling kids from 5 or 6 different schools to come to one high school, and that is a higher risk than actually having them back in full-time instruction. So this was acknowledged at our instructional COVID planning meeting yesterday. RUPOC told the committee that he was going to be bringing this to the board. And I do believe that gave that committee momentum to work hard to bring back elementary kids full-time in person. And there was positive momentum there. So I am inclined to support this only because I believe we can do the work in that committee. And I think coupling this effort by not doing this guided practice and temporarily bringing our secondary kids to distance, which we also don't want to do, can perhaps lower our numbers to a point where we can bring back children. So it's sort of a temporary pause to get to our ultimate goal, which we all know is returning in person and safely staying there. And at our October 5th meeting for that committee, that it's my understanding that is one of the primary focuses. How can we look to phase in full-time instruction by the 19th? So,
Jennifer?
So, full-time instruction by the 19th for elementary, if I may ask? Okay, so then, I just wanted to clarify, thank you. So mixing cohorts, where are these where do we expect that these 520 plus students are going to be if they're not at the guided practice centers? They're most likely going to be out in our community at other childcare facilities or at-home daycares, being exposed to additional kids. So in my mind, we have the same problem. If you don't have full-time, in an elementary school, right, we have 20 kiddos in a classroom. We can control that environment and know who they're around 5 days a week. Here, we're now creating additional opportunities for those 500 plus children to come back together in a hybrid situation for 2 or 3 days a week and bring all those exposures, possible exposures, into the classroom. It doesn't make sense to me how that is reducing the risk.
Great question. I think the challenge here is that this is disappointing for all of us. And we've championed being able to provide this opportunity from the get-go. It's just we don't have the staffing for it, and then there's new research that's coming down and being shared to us about the hybrid instructional model. I don't know where all of our students are going to be on their distance learning days, but I know that what we want to do is work towards our goal of creating a safe environment for our students and our employees so we can bring students back. And is it our responsibility to create that structure that we know is going to be mixing cohorts, or do we, by not providing this, do we not include another barrier to our end goal of bringing in-person instruction? We also have to know that this is a collaborative partnership, as I think Jen talked about when she talked about it today, it's not, schools don't have the ability to solve all of this, right? What we have the ability to do is work with our community and our parents to say, if we all want to get kids back in school, let's look at the numbers, let's look at the risk for our educators, let's look at the risk for our staff, and what can we do together? And this, right now, in terms of the COVID-related piece, this creates a structure that we ourselves are creating that can potentially increase the risk based on what Fargo Cass has told us last week. And number two, we don't have the ability to staff it.
Question, Rupak. Okay, for the information that we approved for the Smart Restart Plan, it states, the guided practice center may be available. So there is not certainty with this. The guided practice center may be available to K through 5 students who are participating in the hybrid instructional model. The center would be open on distance learning days at a high school or middle school. Is there the ability to provide a guided practice center at the elementary schools that the students attend when they are having distance learning? My question is kind of the hiccup here that we have high school or middle school facilities as the space?
No, that is not the only hiccup. I think originally when this plan was developed in July or in the summer when we presented to the board work session, we had decided that if the schools were to stay in hybrid, secondary was going to go online, and then we said, oh, can we now utilize a space that we have those high schools at, and maybe that will allow us to keep kids coming into the guided practice center. So yeah, it is one of the hiccups, but it was never dependent on secondary kids going online. And then when we said we're changing the definition of hybrid, so in level 3, high school students don't have to go, and middle school students don't have to go online, well, then we said, can we use the space that we have at our existing buildings? And then we used 11 classrooms from Agassiz. So that's where, yeah, and then just the way the numbers came in terms of when we provided applications to our parents, we went through the process and we said, okay, what can we provide? I think we first provide notification for the students that would just come to their building, but then we said, okay, how do we serve the remaining amount of students that we have? Because it would be more than just 12 students at one building. We're doing it at a 12-to-1 ratio. We don't have any more than one space at any one elementary school. That's the most that we can give up. So for the remaining students, you might have 5 students at Eagles, 5 students at Centennial, 5 students at Madison that have applied. And this is to get to the 560 of the 900 that have applied. How do we do that? You know, we don't have the ability to say Centennial gets one room, Madison gets one room at Agassiz, because now you have to mix kids just because of the sheer numbers that are needed there. So those are all part of the mixes in what's created that situation.
And then based on the schools where the 560 where the kids attend, I think what you're saying is there's not space within each of those schools to offer kind of like even a version of a guided practice center within those schools for those students so that they wouldn't be going into different environments or different buildings.
Not to that level, and I think what I would say is that instead of even doing that, which would, again, the guided practice center, we have always said was not a school, it was an opportunity on the distance learning day. Level 2 through 5 of our plan allows for in-person instruction for students in need. So if we have that space and staff that's available at our schools and we know that there are students falling behind, wouldn't we rather create those opportunities with our teachers or the paraeducators that we have versus outside proctors that we've hired for this purpose? So it doesn't take away from trying to find where the students are struggling and to be able to provide those supports, but at least we can put it back in the hands of our Fargo Public Schools staff that are already communicating with those teachers, with those students on a daily basis.
So I would assume that communication would take place, that it just wouldn't be, the board has decided, has made this decision, and the guided practice don't exist. We would need to communicate to parents about any specific needs that those parents need, or even or teachers that can see that their students might need some additional services to be able to kind of close that gap or build that bridge a little bit, I would imagine.
Some of that's already happening. You know, we have students that, whether it's a 504 plan or an IEP plan, that are receiving instruction based on what those team decisions are for 5 days a week. And then we have different buildings, have different structures for students that might need interventions and the teacher autonomy to be able to call in and work with the parent to provide those supports. So I think some of that's already been communicated.
Tracy?
I'm just worried about these 560 families and those that out of that won't be able to accommodate this. So is there discussion, or are these families able to continue to enroll in our virtual academy? And do we have the capacity to accommodate if there were to be an influx in that?
I will let Missy take that. I think the short answer is yes. I think regardless of what the instructional plan committee does moving forward and what the numbers continue to do, right now we are limiting enrollment into our virtual academy unless there's some hardships or some needed reason, right, for parents to come in. But we have made those exceptions. But I think even moving forward, depending on what the instructional committee does, we've already talked about how do we increase our capacity. It might look different to be able to provide that service to our students, but to be able to accommodate the requests that we would get.
You know, a school system is never full, and that's a really hard thing sometimes. We would, right now, I feel that our virtual academy is extremely tight for attendance. I will say that I've called other districts around North Dakota to check on that, and everyone is running very high numbers. That does not make that right or wrong. It's just as we're trying to figure that out. So we are looking at a couple of products out there which would cost money that provide a more asynchronous virtual academy and provides a teacher as a facilitator. So we're looking at another way to provide virtual if we come forward with saying we can go full-time and keep everybody safe, we might have some families that really feel they need virtual. And so we're trying to find another option. So we have been researching that right now.
Robin, and then Jennifer.
And sorry, I'm going to have to leave by 8. To Jennifer's point, I've really struggled with what's in our locus of control. And can we control, I mean, what we hear on the talk radio is, well, all these kids on their day off are out partying and they're hanging out with groups. But that doesn't mean the school district should throw everything aside and not try to control and be responsible for the time that those children are in their care. And I struggle with this in my business as well, you know, taking care of 800 families. So you have to control what's in your control. It's a tough place to be. And if you didn't, it would be pretty irresponsible, in my opinion, morally, to not follow the guidance just because the kids go hang out and go do birthday parties together. So that's where I'm at. And then I guess I would say if I get to vote on this before I leave, if we don't vote on it, then what? So we're kind of pushed back into a corner here. Timing is rotten. I don't think anybody wanted it to be this way. I feel terrible for these families, but it doesn't mean that the district is going to give up on them, clearly. That's how I feel.
Brian?
You know, when I made the motion, I don't feel good about it either. It's not something that makes you happy, but when your administration is telling you there's no staff and that we can't do this the way it's written, we need to make a change. I have complete confidence that the staff is going to try to do whatever it is they're going to do to meet the needs of these families. They're going to try their hardest. No doubt in my mind. That's what I'm hearing. And so, as a board member and as a COVID coordinator in 2 different districts, I completely understand what he's talking about. Mixing kids up and things like that. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Jennifer?
Okay, so I have a few comments. I feel like I understand that we can only control what we can control, but I don't mean events that kiddos are attending. We know that these are elementary kids and they need care. Now, we haven't surveyed to know how many have both parents working outside the home, but my guess is if 560 of them enrolled, it's because there's a need for during the day for care. So it's probably safe to take, although I don't like assumptions, to take the leap to say they're going to need something if it's not us. Now, I believe that during this very same discussion about our levels and what things that we were going to offer, there was discussion about, this is a district of education and not, that should come first. So that doesn't, to me, it's a little bit offensive that we're going back and saying that now that's not, because we already said we were going to. We can't just pull the rug. We made a commitment as a district, and we're not giving a solution. We're saying we can't do it, but we're not giving them a solution. Whether that is, let's think outside the box. Can we split our days for elementary kids? Morning group, afternoon group, cleaning in between, longer days. Right now, they're only going till 1:30. Okay, so can group 2 come in the late afternoon? Let's think about this. Let's think about community partners, facilities. I mentioned this before, churches. I know that there's licensing requirements. There's been all sorts of executive orders to make things work in the past. All of these plans are being touched by DPI and our governor. Perhaps this is one that needs to be viewed by them as well, to say, we need a solution. I cannot support just pulling the rug. And to Seth's point, we haven't even heard from them what this means for families. So I can't.
Rupak?
I think, Jennifer, you're making an assumption that we haven't tried everything possible. We are, and when you say the DPI and our governor's office, have they looked at this? Their first requirement for us creating our smart restart plans and our health and safety plans is to work with local healthcare agencies. The representative from Fargo Cass Public Health, when we had this conversation prior to bringing this to the board last week, said that's a bad idea. Those are quote unquote because of the mixing of students with our guided practice center. And I repeated that at the instructional COVID committee when that representative was there, and they agreed. So this would go against the guidance given to us from Fargo Cass Public Health. It's not that we don't want to provide this service to our students, we do. There's been new research on COVID that's coming out from the governor's office, from DPI, as part of the town hall meetings. Actually, last week's town hall meeting, they started with slides that talk about, let's start with talking about more research around hybrid and what's happening when you provide opportunities for students to mix on their off days, why that could be worse off than in-person instruction. So when you say, okay, let's look at churches, I know there's licensing requirements, all of those things, they don't just magically appear. We do have to get those places licensed. We do have to work within a time frame to be able to provide all that. And that, again, is under the assumption that we stay in a level 3 instruction. So we are going to spend all of this time trying to find staff, which even going through a temp agency, if that's what we have to do, to find staff, train them to provide this opportunity for an opportunity that might not exist. When wouldn't our efforts and time be better concentrated on our end goal, which would be to say, instead of focusing on that, let's focus on everything that we can do to bring all of our students back. This is not something that we want to do to families or parents, but I don't think COVID-19 is anything that we want to do our families or parents. The reality of the situation is that we're dealing with information that changes on a day-to-day basis. We were in July asked to create a model based on a color-coded system by the state of North Dakota, by the governor's office and by the Department of Public Instruction. In that guidance, they said, please create a system that has you going from full in-person instruction through online instruction and also exploring a hybrid model in between. We thought that with that time, we created this model because we'd be able to staff it based on their guidance. Now, in the last week, that same entity is pushing down on school districts across the state saying, well, maybe now you should consider not doing hybrid anymore. So these are the parameters and the challenges that we're dealing with. It's not that any of us sit here as educators wanting to say, let's pull the rug under our parents, because that's not what we want to do. But if you want us to put in a situation that might make it harder for us to return in-person instruction and to be able to provide a product that's going to be staffed by individuals that we can't find, so we're going to have to work with the temp staffing agency, because that's what we feel like the board's responsibility is, then we are happy to administer it, and we will, which is why it's a discussion at this point.
I'm disappointed that we're at the point where we need to have this discussion. I think we all are. I don't know any of us that would say, oh, this is great to have this discussion right now. I'm going to vote yes. I don't like the fact that I'm voting yes, but I'm going to vote yes. One reason is because I'm thinking back to when the Smart Restart Plan was presented to us. And we talked about the necessity of that plan to be flexible and for us to be flexible, and that it was a flexible and nimble plan. I believe that the information that was presented to us at the time was presented to us with the best knowledge and the best information and the best ideas with the information that we had at the time. And as we all know, the change is constant. That's what we know with COVID is what's constant is change. And I think what we're being presented with here tonight is information, is new. We're taking the information in that has evolved since the plan was approved. And now I feel like we're at this point. My approval of this will also assume that we will be taking very careful communication forward with those families that know or that think that they are going to be participating in this opportunity. That our district will be charged with managing some sensitivities there. And I'm going to trust that we will do that. And also, I would encourage the instructional plan committee to, if this passes tonight, that the instructional plan committee take the passing of this really seriously, obviously taking into consideration everything, all the numbers and all the data where we are with COVID. But I think what we're all saying here tonight, no matter how we vote, is that we really thought this was a good idea, that we really feel like those students need some extra help. And so if this passes, what are we going to be able to do? What kind of creativity is there going to be in terms of discussion at that next meeting to really push the envelope wherever we can to try to help make sure that the students get as much help as they can get. Jennifer, Tracy.
So just a follow-up, Rupak, to some of your response. The morning, afternoon example that I gave, could that be a viable option, yes or no, and why?
So your option, it would be to have school in the morning and then school in the afternoon for two different groups of kids. I would tell you right now, I mean, I would have to dive deeper into that, but I would tell you that just off the top of my head, I don't think that would be within the parameters of our negotiated contract with our teachers. We'd have to work through planning time. I will tell you right now that our staff just trying to manage a full day is beyond burdensome. Their workload is extremely high right now. So do we think that's possible? No, I don't think that, but I don't want to commit without diving deeper into what does that even look like.
Jennifer.
And if I may, just a follow-up, I guess that's what I mean when I say that we made this commitment. It's how can we come up with a solution rather than to just say, we can't. And when we're getting these recommendations from, the CDC, it's always been mixed cohorts are a higher risk. And so we want to do everything we can to mitigate that, hence why elementary was, a lower risk than middle school or high school, because we talked about students traveling from classroom to classroom. So in my mind, when I hear you say that, that is not new information. And so that's where I'm, again, struggling with this recommendation came forward based on that same information.
In July, we were told to create a green or blue through red smart restart plan, which included a hybrid option. That was in DPI's guidance. Now, we are being told at our town hall meetings that we have every week, which involves a state team from Department of Health, DPI, and the governor's office, hybrid is bad. So because of this very reason. So there is new information because we had created this plan, this hybrid option based off the original guidance that we had received at that point. Again, I think the conversation, I think we're forgetting two things here. One is staffing is huge. So we're also making an assumption that by increasing the price or spending our dollars here versus our other dollars that we were going to allocate for other purposes, that we'll be able to find the right and appropriate staff to run the guided practice center that are not, maybe not our own staff or whatever fixed term time that we're offering that. Hopefully that happens, but it is a hope. That's kind of where we are with this sense of urgency right now. So the question again becomes, do you want to spend the time, energy, and efforts right now in trying to make this work, knowing that staffing is a huge challenge and that there is new research coming out that would potentially go against this, and this is against Fargo Cass Public Health's advice? Or would you rather spend your time, money, energy, and efforts trying to reach your end goal, which is getting students back in school? So I think these are the discussions that our committee has to deal with every 2 weeks. These are the conversations that we're having on a day-to-day basis. I don't think anyone here wants students to have a non-structured opportunity on a distance learning day. But how do we get to our end goal, which is to get to all students back in, for in-person instruction and stay there in a safe and efficient manner for our students and our staff?
I know, Robin, you were saying that you were going to need to leave. I would like it if all of us here are able to vote. Are you able to stick around a little bit longer? Yeah, I'm texting. Okay. Tracy?
Thank you. I just wanted to highlight that, you know, from the beginning, this concept of the guided practice center was always a value added to our district. It certainly was not instructed by DPI or anything else. And while I respect and do not want to backtrack on a commitment we've made, I really view this as a bonus that is unique to our district that we were offering. I am in a nationwide group of physicians that advises school districts, and this was extremely unique, and I can assure you schools across the country are not having something like this. So it gives me great pause, as I said earlier, these 500 families, there's no question, but this was already something that we were going above and beyond to do. And I just agree with the sentiment that let's take this energy and time and wherewithal to guide our energies to getting kids back instead of this sort of Band-Aid approach that it really initially was.
Jennifer?
So, can I just throw this out there, food for thought? So if, to your second point or question earlier, if it didn't pass, would that sort of force us to come up with a better solution, which might look different than we had originally intended these guided practices, but could potentially benefit all of our students, whether that is a unique approach to morning, afternoon, split days, whatever that is, working with the teachers union, because like everyone has said, the goal is to get back to in-person for all students. So I'm just curious, would that force us to, you know, sit here until we can come up with a solution?
I think if the board voted this down, we would probably have to dive into our budget, redo our budget, look at paying the additional premium for the temp agency to staff it, and then do that, and then just continue running the risk that that could potentially raise the numbers of impacted students and staff in Fargo Public Schools. And we're going to go against the guidance of Fargo Cass Public Health, but like I said, we'd be happy to administer and do that.
I'm really hesitant for us to say we'd be happy to go ahead and do that, because going against the guidance of public health it does not sound like anything that we want to be doing. I don't think that you mean that, Dr. Gandhi.
I meant we'd be carrying out the directive of the board. Sorry.
Yes, exactly. Again, I think that in passing it, it also provides a challenge to the district and the instructional plan committee, and a charge to figure out, now what are we going to do? There's all the discussion about everyone, we all want everyone back in school, but we want them there safely. We need steps to be taken in order for students can be back in the building safely, and so that our staff can feel safe and healthy. Students are going to school as if that's their work, just like all other places around the city, the state, and the nation, whether it's one business or an organization, and employees are needing to be working from home. And unfortunately, I think we're at the situation right now, at least when we're in hybrid model for the K through 5 students, that they're going to be at home a little bit more too. And it's in an effort for our community to be safe and healthy and strong. None of it's fortunate. None of it is something that we would wish. Any other comments before we vote? Jennifer?
So when the recommendation came for us not to create this mixed cohort opportunity, was there follow-up conversation or questions asked about, okay, so let's play this scenario out. Those 560 kids now all go to a daycare, and there are a number of different ones, and then come back together. Do we have numbers or data that was shared around that in terms of what elevated risk now we're exposing students to due to that?
Yeah, there's two things. So we have looked at, and I can't tell you off the top of my head, the identified positive cases at the elementary age for our school district, where those are coming from. I think compared to other districts, we've had a smaller number coming in from a childcare or daycare provider. I can't speculate how that data would translate with the absence of a guided practice center, because then I'd be having to make an assumption on how many of those parents are going to utilize a daycare now for that opportunity. But the conversation that we had with Fargo County Public Health when they said, okay, yeah, this mixing groups is a bad idea, and in fact, this was actually shared with our instructional plan committee yesterday, was, but why wouldn't you, they said instead we would suggest that you look at potential opportunities, or what can you do differently to bring all the students back, and using a concept such as podding. They asked us to look at a different school district and maybe some things that they're doing and explore those options. So again, I would say that we would want to explore, is there an opportunity to bring our students back in a safe and efficient manner versus just filling this void? I think that would be the better way to go.
Perfect. So along those lines, could that be part of this recommendation? So, or for the board to say that this is, really something that would be a directive? Because to your point, that would be getting them all back in school. And there are other districts already doing it. We would have all the elementary students in school full-time.
We have a motion on the table. In order for that to change, there would need to be an amendment made.
Right. I mean, I'm just trying to build onto what you were saying. How do we make that happen? Because ultimately, it's a board decision, right? This is coming to us to vote yes or no, much like the levels that we were in, approved the plan initially. So I'm asking the board to say, okay, if the board wants to support full-time elementary, I guess I should just ask the question. They could do so, correct? They could ask you to do so
Brian.
in this fashion.
As a board member, I'm not real comfortable telling the administration how we're going to do this, because I haven't put in near amount of time and effort as this cabinet has been. And so As I said before, I think this is the third time I've said it now, but I'll say it a fourth time or a third time, whatever it was, that I have complete control or complete confidence that this administration is going to look at trying to serve these 560 families. And I think it's left up to them. And I think that's the way it has to happen. I don't want to be, I'm not qualified in this as a board member right now to get involved into this. I'm just not. I'm not comfortable with it. And so I'm not going to pretend that I'm the expert here, even though I am the COVID-19 manager for 2 different school districts in 2 different states. But I do respect the people that they work with as a committee.
And I do think that, Rupak, you've given us some examples of some work and some thought that might go into some other options. You're talking about potting, and we don't quite know where that's going to land, but I feel like what you're demonstrating is that there is going to be a continuous effort to, again, if we're moving away from the guided practice centers, there's going to be an effort to move towards something else. But I agree with Brian. I don't feel like I'm qualified to provide that directive, and I also know that based on where we are with COVID in our community, I'm not going to dictate what level we ought to be at. That is something that's up to the instructional plan committee. All right. Anne Marie, could you please call the roll?
Benson.
No.
Gullickson.
Yes.
Holden.
Yes.
Brian Nelson.
Yes.
Robin Nelson.
Yes.
Newman.
Yes.
Paulson.
No.
Knutson.
Yes, motion passes. Thank you for the good discussion on that. All right, we're going to move into board reports. Robin, do you want to make a quick report before you take off? I know you need to leave. Thanks for sticking with us.
Sure. September 17th was a wrap-up of Basler's P12 Alliance work. I forwarded all of those documents to the cabinet and administration. They did some great work for how to work with kids with different situations and distance learning. Nice format there. On the next day, September 18th, we had a Governmental Affairs Committee meeting. You did receive an email from me. We're going to start reaching out and building those relationships with our legislators. And also, the League of Women Voters has their candidate forums happening tonight and tomorrow night, so I encourage you to tune into those as well. I think we missed 44 tonight. The other district that's up in our school district there's 44 and 46, so we want to watch those closely. I had the opportunity to go to Longfellow in Washington just for some of my work items, and Longfellow's safe entrance is incredible. It is so much safer for families to, security's all there. When I talked to Eric Henderson, he said, yeah, I actually have parents come and knock on my window and say, hi, I'm here. So it's much more secure, but also very functional. It looks like it was meant to be there, so nice work on that architecture. Rupak referred to it today. There's the North Dakota Return to Learn Town Hall. They talked about actually some new data or a new statement that's going to be released today that makes this conversation even more precarious. I'm not quite sure if I followed it all, but I'm sure Tracy would. When she'll hear it, maybe Rupak can expand on that as well. I believe that is about it. I didn't write down the next date for GAC, but it is the third, Tracy will know, the third Friday at 7:30 a.m. Sound about right? October 18th? That's okay. We'll figure it out. The notice will come. So thank you for letting me go first, Rebecca. Have a nice night, everybody.
Thank you, Robin. All right, how about Nikki and then Brian?
Thank you, Rebecca. As far as the communications, I'm going to flip this around, engagement and advocacy committee, we had a great discussion. Very pleased. We have a fantastic group that's very engaged, very compassionate, and very interested in doing the work at hand. Due to the great efforts by the Fargo Public Schools communications team, a survey was released to collect public feedback about if the Woodrow Wilson name should be changed. And the exciting thing about that is that we can hear from all the parties who are interested on both sides. And once that comes back, we were able to allow a lengthy amount of time. Once that comes back, then we can evaluate how we move forward. If there is adequate demand to change the name, we'll work into the renaming process and seeking public feedback for that. If there is not, then we will take another look at what our next steps will be. So that's great. We are going to meet then early October after the results are in. I want to say October 5th, but is it on here? October 7th. October 7th, we will be meeting again. So I'll be looking forward to that and our team reviewing those results. As far as what I've been up to since the last meeting, September 10th, I attended Learning Heroes Ready to Partner Back to School webinar. Also September 10th, North Dakota Portrait of a Graduate through DPI. September 16th, I did the School Board Association Lunch and Learn on legal aspects and considerations as a school board member. Also attended a webinar from an organization called Common Sense on building a better tomorrow. September 18th, I listened in to the GAC committee. September 20th, Prairie Public Broadcasting and I don't remember the formal name, but the Minnesota immigrant, I won't get it right. Tracy, do you know what the name of it is?
The Immigrant Law Center of Minnesota.
There it is.
The documentary was called Indivisible.
Yep, so I attended that, I watched the Indivisible documentary and then also attended that virtual panel discussion. And then today, we had photos this morning, we had photos this afternoon, and here we are.
Thank you, Nikki.
I attended the GAC meeting on September 18th. It would have been last Friday. We have a planning meeting on September 25th, this Friday, and it's going to be on these 12 scenarios of boundaries, the way I saw. So congratulations to everybody who helped make all of those boundaries possible, ideas and things like that. I reached out to my liaisons, Clara Barton Hawthorne with Becky Folden and Centennial, Dr. Leanne Hansen. Snooped around on their websites, learned a few things. And then I had the opportunity to listen to Dr. Gandhi and his 2 radio shows. I thought you did a nice job with those radio shows and answering the questions and getting the information out there. I appreciate, Dr. Gandhi, your weekly update, letting us know everything that you do. You are a busy man, sir, a very busy man, and I do appreciate everything that you are doing for our students and our staff and your communication amongst everybody. And then, as we always do, get several emails, and you get to read those and learn what's on everybody's minds. That's it.
Tracy.
Thank you. I, too, on September 10th, attended the Communications, Engagement, and Advocacy Committee meeting, and I think we did a lot of good, positive work there. I'm excited to see what comes from the surveys and our plan moving forward. On September 16th, I attended the North Dakota School Board Association Lunch and Learn about liability and insurance as it relates to schools. A little bit out of my wheelhouse, but I feel like I learned a lot. I have just briefly spoken with reporters regarding the COVID-19 Instructional Plan Committee. I was at the GAC meeting, called in the GAC meeting September 18th. I too watched the documentary Nikki referenced and was a part of the Zoom panel discussion following. And then yesterday was, of course, our COVID-19 Instructional Plan meeting. And I just want to take a moment to thank, I think I receive a lion's share of these emails, and I just want to thank everyone. We really are contacted by a lot of constituents sharing their personal stories and how these decisions affect them. And please know if I don't immediately reply, I read them all and I hear you all, and I try diligently to represent your voice is my place on this committee as the school board member. I also do a lot of data and a lot of research as the physician, even though it's not my official hat on that committee, but I spend a lot of time outside of those meetings bringing data and emailing back and forth with our state epidemiologist, and I'm just doing my best to bring my best effort to that committee. It takes a lot of time. And I just wanted to report that I did not read my book for my book club this month, but I did read the following things. I'm very proud of it. Spending money wisely and getting the most from school district budgets. Again, out of my wheelhouse, learned a lot. And I read the 2 books that were given to us, Implementing Policy Governance and Staying on Track, and the Policy Governance Model and the Role of the School Board Member. So I hope that'll be beneficial. Thanks.
Thank you, Tracy. Seth?
I also attended the Communications Engagement and Advocacy meeting on the 10th, and I would also encourage everyone to let everybody know about that survey that's online so that we can get as much feedback as humanly possible when we reconvene with that committee on the 7th. This upcoming planning committee meeting on the 25th. And I reached out to my liaisons, Brad at Carl Ben and Megan at Lincoln Elementary and Jennifer at Ed Clapp. I'm just waiting on Jennifer to get back to me to set up a school visit. Brad and Megan sound very enthusiastic about how teachers and students are handling everything being back, so it's encouraging. So I'm excited to go and visit them next week. So. And that's it.
Thank you, Seth. Jennifer?
So I too was at the September 10th Communications and Advocacy Committee meeting. I called into GAC on September 18th. There is a planning meeting on the 25th Friday I plan to be, and I really appreciated your comments around emails, Tracy, and I think, want to echo exactly how you stated that. We have received hundreds, and it is hard to get to reply in a way that you desire to personalize the message, and so that is oftentimes timeliness becomes difficult. But I do want to reiterate that I read them all, so I didn't just take this opportunity to tell people that, and that I appreciate that they are paying attention and that they are advocating for students, and that we really do try to convey that. So I definitely could not say that better than Tracy, even though I really tried. And the book read was a good reminder. I too have started them, but I can't say that I have finished. So I will indeed do that before our work session. So, and I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. David?
I reached out to Andy Dallin at North to see how, with this hybrid model, he wants to conduct visits this year, and we had a long discussion. Decided how we're going to do it. We have governance meeting this Thursday at 7:30, planning meeting at 7:30 on Friday, and just a heads up to anyone on the negotiations committee, I'm going to be getting in touch with Jolynn tomorrow to set up a meeting in October. So I'll be sending asking her to send out a questionnaire to asking what would work for you. We'd like to, I think we need to get a focus ahead of negotiations, and I am also reaching out to the FEA because I would be very, very happy if they would participate in these meetings as well. We're not beginning negotiations per se, but we have a whole lot of discussion that we could do. And then what Tracy and Jennifer have both said, I've been astounded by the number of emails and the length of some of them. And I too have read every single one of them, and I feel guilty that I haven't responded to you people. I hope I'm sharing your concerns with the board when the issues come up, and I just encourage you, I thank each and every one of you who has taken the time to reach out to us, and please be assured that the fact that you're not being answered by us as individual, or by me as an individual board member does not mean I'm not listening to you, because I certainly am.
Well, I think that we've all communicated to one way or another about the emails or maybe phone calls coming through. So I reiterate what everyone else said. There is a president's report, a printed out report, thanks to Anne Marie, that is at all of our seats here. A few items that I've been involved in. I have started to become involved in a project called the Fargo Community Water Tower Project. There's going to be a new water tower constructed at 7th Avenue North and University, so downtown basically. It is going to be an example of community art, or public art, I should say, through the City of Fargo Planning Department. There are some local consultants that have been hired to get that project through, and with some designers that are not from our community, but I've been involved in some virtual conversations regarding, well, what does Fargo feel like? What are the people of Fargo like? What would we like to convey in very simple, imagery on this water tower? What kinds of colors would we like to use? They asked if they might be able to receive some feedback and input from middle and high school students. So in reaching out to Dr. Gross, I know that Sharon Eide has shared information with our middle and high school art teachers, and Sharon Eide is our visual arts curriculum facilitator for Fargo schools. So I'm hoping that middle and high school students that are involved in art in our district take some time to learn about something that's going on in our community and how they might be able to help participate and give their input. The Core Neighborhood Steering Committee that I'm a member of, we meet October 6th. And I also participated in a phone call with the consultant that was hired for that project. And they come to Fargo every once in a while, off and on. Sometimes our meetings are doing Zoom because of COVID. But we talked specifically about some of the concerns that the district has, especially in regard to our core neighborhoods, the schools, student population, the capacity issues, the boundary issues. So I kind of tried to relay some of the dialogue that we've had as a board. And as we know, I explained to him that we have a boundary discussion that's going to be coming up real soon. And he was interested in receiving information that we have in our operational plan, in our strategic plan, also interested in looking and learning about how our district is broken down in terms of socioeconomics, disparities, and how that kind of connects to how our core neighborhoods are doing. So I will provide him with that information. Rupak, if I need anything that I don't have, I'll contact you. Native American Commission meets October 1st. Jennifer Mastrud and I are going to meet tomorrow for coffee, and so we'll have our first meeting where we're going to get to know each other better. And I think that as a result of the conversation that we've had here this evening, there will be plenty to talk about. Governance is this Thursday at 7:30 a.m. Planning, I will plan to attend Friday. Attended GAC last week. Want to definitely thank everyone that has been involved on the instructional plan committee and Rupak and the administration, to acknowledge that even though the dialogue here this evening was kind of strained because we had some, of course, really important decisions to make here tonight, but that we support you in the work that you're doing, and that it's hard work. I mean, we acknowledge that it's hard work, and so you're on the front lines for us, and we appreciate it, and we appreciate everyone that is standing behind you as well. And that is my report for the evening. And if there's nothing else, it looks like it's 8:30, and we are ready to take off. Thank you. Meeting.